The Movie Preview Critic. Informing and entertaining your movie world.
What's up, good movie lovers? This is the Movie Preview Critic, welcoming you to Movie Night. This week we're going to be watching Batman and Robin. And yes, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, hey, I've already wasted 2 hours of my life on that piece of shit one time. I really don't want to do it a second time. I agree. I feel the same way. But with The Dark Knight being considered for Oscars, and with it regarded a cinematic masterpiece, and definitely one of the best comic book, if not the best comic book movies ever, it really deserves our attention to go back to what was considered the death of the Batman franchise, to really understand how that came about and what it meant, so that we can better appreciate its rebirth and return to cinematic glory. So go ahead, get your DVD, pop it in. If it's the Warner Brothers version, it's probably the one from 1997-98, just when DVDs were starting to get popular. And it's going to be really crappy. It's going to have no music or animated menus, and it's pretty much just play, scenes, and language. So hit play, and the movie's pretty much going to kick in right away. Which I guess you can't complain about, considering that when you put a movie in today, it takes about 20 minutes to get to the main menu if you just watch it straight through because of the previews and commercials and all that kind of stuff. Pretty much like going to the theater nowadays. The Warner Brothers logo comes up, it turns into the bat symbol, and it becomes frozen. This whole idea of incorporating the studio logo into the story, into the mood and the tone, was just really becoming popular right around the late 90s. This movie's 97, and I remember in 99 The Matrix did it, also another Warner Brothers film where you have that image of the studio lot and the green tint overlay, the kind of digital reality that makes you feel like you're in the computer already. Before, the studio logo always felt separate, and then it felt like the movie started. So here, we kind of have this immersion immediately. And the origins of that idea can probably be traced back to Mel Brooks, when some of his spoofs in the 70s incorporated the whole notion of making fun of the studio logo and bringing it into the story. And here we have all the actors' names, bigger than life, being introduced. Really reminds me of the opening of Star Wars, or, to speak of Mel Brooks, Spaceballs, where you have the Star Destroyer coming in right to left, bigger than life, taking up all the screen. And we'll talk about the actors in a moment, but let's get this issue. We have the Batman symbols, right? Batman and Robin symbols coming together and joining, and then the name pops out. And then we go to this, the infamous opening where we get bat nipples, bat ass, bat crotch, bat ass, bat crotch. So let's just address this right away. It's been 11 years and it's been talked about a lot. Joel Schumacher, the director, known as the Batman Killer, is also known as the man who tried to make Batman gay. He's openly gay, and it's been discussed a lot if this was intentional. So we obviously have all the close-ups here of the bat genitalia, the bat naughty parts, and here's another little tilt up from toe to head. You get another full-bodied shot passing by the crotch again. The two manly guys, right? These bodies, these suits were modeled off of Greek statues. And then we get this Batmobile kind of close up of the head. It's like this big phallic symbol. So the question we have to ask is that intentional? Does it really exist? Or are we reading into it? And that's a tricky area to get into, because you can pretty much treat anything in the world as a Rorschach test. You see what you want to see. You're putting yourself into it. You're seeing who you are. There's a famous quote that goes, "We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are." But then again, in a movie, every step is so planned and carefully orchestrated that there really are no mistakes. So when the camera here zooms in on a crotch and an ass, it's doing it for a specific reason. There's been some thought and intention behind that. And Joel Schumacher wouldn't be the first person to address these issues. There was a famous book in 1954 called Seduction of the Innocent by Dr. Frederick Wertham, and he kind of attacked comic books in general for polluting the youth of America, for being a major cause of juvenile delinquency. Ah, the 1950s, where everyone suspected everyone else of destroying the fabric of society. Dr. Wertham claimed that because comics dealt with violence and sex and drugs and all these other underworld activities, activities that it was influencing the youth of America in a highly negative way. Anyways, he was one of the first to publicly proclaim that Batman and Robin were gay partners. In the 30s and 40s, when Batman really became popular, making that kind of assertion would be really a stretch. But when you look at it through our postmodern, sarcastic point of view, you really have to question it, because you have these two young, strong, single guys that don't really hang out with girls, that live in a mansion all by themselves with an old man butler that takes care of their every need, who, by the way, refers to Robin as Master Dick. It has a lot of comic potential, and it's actually already been taken advantage of, coincidentally right around the time when Batman and Robin was being developed. In 1996, comedian Robert Smigel created the Ambiguously Gay Duo, an animated comedy sketch that started on the Dana Carvey Show and later moved to Saturday Night Live. If you've never seen an episode, do a quick video search and you'll be pleasantly surprised. They're pretty hilarious. And you have to wonder if Joel Schumacher maybe saw an episode or two while the development of Batman and Robin was going on. This movie was shot towards the end of '96 in September and finished around January, so there's a good chance that he may have been exposed to it and decided to incorporate some of those ideas. Overall, in my opinion, it's a little bit far-fetched that Joel Schumacher wanted to change Batman and Robin so fundamentally. Within the story structure, you see that Batman does have a girlfriend played by Elle Macpherson, and later Robin is actually falling in love with the Batgirl character. And the reason Batman or Bruce Wayne doesn't have a wife or a regular girlfriend is that he's a pretty up character. This is a guy who dresses up as a crime-fighting bat at night, and who's still trying to get over the trauma of losing his parents. And that brings up the ultimate reason why neither of the dynamic duo have any significant others. Because they have secrets, and it's better to live alone than to trust someone else with that and risk your enemies finding out. A superhero topic that's thoroughly been dealt with in the Spider-Man movies in terms of Peter Parker not wanting to tell Mary Jane his true identity because his enemies would then find out about her and use her against him. Looking back today, it's obvious Joel Schumacher wasn't trying to change the character relationship of Batman and Robin. He was just getting close-ups of, at that time, two of Hollywood's sexiest men. In 1997, George Clooney was voted by people as the sexiest man alive, and Chris O'Donnell was being pushed on the public as the hottest thing since Brad Pitt. When it comes down to it, these close-ups aren't the reason why the movie's horrible. That would be like saying the close-ups of Megan Fox's tight abs in Transformers as she's leaning over the car are the reason that movie didn't work. Like Sigmund Freud said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, or in this case, a bat ass is just a bat ass. To find the movie truth of why Batman and Robin is considered to be such a horrible movie, we don't need to look any further than this scene here in the museum, when everything's iced over and the dynamic duo are battling Mr. Freeze and his henchmen on ice skates with hockey sticks. With this being the opening action sequence of the movie, it really establishes the pattern of what's going to come for the next 2 hours. And as you're sitting there in the audience, you realize that, okay, this is the tone. It's going to just be over the top, ridiculous, and pretty much abandon any kind of logic. Because when you think about it, if you're a criminal, if you're an arch criminal, this mastermind, and you have all these henchmen, and you want to steal a diamond, what do? You make as much noise as possible. You come in there with the biggest, loudest outfit, and the most impractical weapons you can find. Instead of just machine guns, and maybe some body armor, they show up in these goofy hockey team uniforms, and ice over the floor so they can skate around. And if that wasn't absurd enough, Batman and Robin just happen to have ice skates in the bottom of their shoes, and all they need to do to activate them is click their heels together. Now you can just ask yourself, how would they know that they would need these tools in this situation? The logical answer is they wouldn't. There's no possible way they could foresee the exact weapons that they need in any kind of situation. What this becomes is basically kind of a homage on crack to the 1960s Batman, which was famous for the Bat utility belt, which always had the necessary tool for Batman and Robin to get out of whatever situation they found themselves in. This really brings up a key issue, or a key element, in all the Batman films since Tim Burton's all the way through Christopher Nolan's, and that's the issue of the director having a vision for their movies. If you look at Tim Burton, Batman and Batman Returns really had a uniform style and tone to them that really emanated from Burton's sensibilities. The same thing can be said for Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Christopher Nolan has brought just this utter sense of reality, making Batman as believable as possible, but then also addressing the current social, political climate. Nolan uses the Batman character as a way to explore and understand our current world. So looking back on Schumacher's two films, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, in the mid to late 90s, it's easy to say, yeah, those two movies really sucked, and they ruined the Batman franchise, but on the other hand, you really can commend Joel Schumacher for having a vision of Batman and bringing it to life on the screen. Nothing like this has ever really been duplicated on the screen since, maybe with the exception of Moulin Rouge. So in terms of what Joel Schumacher wanted Batman to become, he did a really great job of seeing that vision come to life on screen. Again, it was an obvious homage to the 1960s Batman, with kind of just lightheartedness and cartoony, cliche comic booky playfulness. But with that series and the first Batman movie from the 60s, they were all created and took place before the counterculture explosion of 67, 68, 69, and before psychedelics became a major force in the world. Looking back at the 1960s series and the first movie, you get a sense that there's this rock and roll, hippie trippy kind of tone, a promise of what's to come, but the LSD effect hasn't really taken place. This is almost like Joel Schumacher going back and saying, the 60s Batman really needed an infusion of LSD. Batman Forever and Batman Begins have this psychedelic tone to them, but it's more modern than it is a nostalgic throwback to the 60s. The 90s had its own mind-tripping drug of choice, ecstasy. In the 60s, rock and roll seemed to be the music of choice for the youth to re-tribalize and come together as a people. In the mid to late 90s, it was techno and trance. And it wasn't the rock concert, it was the rave, with the lights and the glow sticks and the neon. And that's really what all the set pieces and action sequences of Batman and Robin feel like. A big rave. Mr. Freeze is basically just one huge glow stick. You know what, this might be an interesting experiment. Remember hearing how The Wizard of Oz could perfectly be synced up with Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon? I have a suspicion that if you turn down the sound during the action sequences of Batman and Robin and play a trance song, it'll transform that moment into a 90s rave. Right now I'm watching the moment where Batman has jumped inside the escape rocket of Mr. Freeze, and then Freeze has frozen Batman's arms to the side of the walls with some really goofy looking ice handcuffs. The whole museum sequence, culminating with this rocket into outer space, is really similar to Austin Powers, the first movie, which also came out in 1997. It actually came out a month before Batman and Robin. That one came out in May. Batman and Robin was in June. So you have to kind of wonder what's up with those similarities. It's the same thing where Austin Powers breaks up Dr. Evil's little party at the beginning, and it's very similar where you have this kind of 1960s vibe in Austin Powers that is set in the 60s, and it's just coincidental how Batman and Robin feels like the 1960s movie. But in both movies you have this kind of big fight in the middle of like a dance floor-y kind of area, and then the villain takes off in a rocket in both instances. So who knows, maybe just a little synchronicity, collective conscious coincidence. And this brings up an awareness that was just starting to take hold of Hollywood in the late 90s. In 1996, you had Scream come out and be hugely successful. And that was basically a sarcastic Generation X breakdown deconstruction of the 70s and 80s horror slasher films. It was basically a spoof movie like Airplane or Naked Gun, but without the level of absurdity. Which is basically what Austin Powers was, a breakdown of the James Bond spy films. So it could be argued that Batman and Robin is a breakdown, a deconstruction of the superhero genre at that time. This was before the superhero explosion of the 2000s, and back then the only superhero franchises that really had a long shelf life were Superman and Batman. And with those two franchises, it just seemed that the more sequels were made, the more ridiculous each part became. And by ridiculous, that mainly means it becomes less logical. The characters do bigger and crazier and more unbelievable things, like this sequence here, where Batman and Robin are basically surfing through the sky on pieces from Freeze's rocket. And yes, if you were listening to the dialogue, Robin said surfs up just as they were leaving the rocket, and as Robin's surfing down the side of a building, he screams out a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle phrase, "Cowabunga." And let's try to ignore the fact that just a minute ago, the rocket was so high in the atmosphere, it was starting to ice up, and both Batman and Robin just open the door, and of course, there's no problem breathing up there, even though at that altitude, usually any human would die, and Batman and Robin don't put on any kind of oxygen masks or anything that might logically make us think, okay, I could see them surviving that. They just open the doors, jump out, everything's fine. And then Freeze jumps down here, and he turns his gun towards the ground and just shoots it, and that lightens his fall, and he manages to safely land. It's at this point, about 14 minutes into the movie, that the audience has to decide, either I want to keep watching this, and that means turning my brain off so I can enjoy it, and not be distracted by 4th grade questions of logic, or I'm going to turn it off and save my sanity. Which would be threatened by this moment here, where Robin dives after Freeze, holding the diamond in his hand, and Freeze shoots him in midair, and for some reason, everything on Robin freezes except the diamond in his hand. If you watch Freeze take the diamond out of Robin's hand, you can actually see that the ice went under the diamond and froze around it. Ow, I'm starting to get a headache. There's a firework effect of headaches going on inside my brain right now, and I think it's because mass amounts of neurons and synapses are just spontaneously combusting in suicidal rage. It's like Hannibal Lecter cut the dome off of my skull, poured soda and Pop Rocks in there, put the dome back on, and then shook my head for an hour. Hold on a second. Okay, I just looked up Batman and Robin and found that there was a link to the American Psychological Association website, and they list it as a form of non-invasive lobotomy. Oh good, and they give an example. They actually say that watching this scene here, where Batman takes a frozen Robin and puts him into a vat of cold water and heats it up with a Star Trek phaser that he stole from Captain Picard, and that totally thaws him, allowing him to emerge fully conscious and seemingly unaffected by being totally frozen for the last 30 to 45 seconds. The only thing that actually happens is his hair is messed up. Watching that scene creates the same amount of brain damage as sniffing glue and doing keg stands every 2 hours every day for 2 years. And there's actually a warning here that if you don't turn the movie off at that point and you watch the next moment when Freeze escapes with the diamond and says for some reason you have 10 minutes to thaw Robin and I'll kill you later, instead of killing both of them now and not having to worry about them at a further point in the story, your nose will start to bleed and you'll slip into a 6-month coma, where for some reason, which science hasn't been able to explain or comprehend, you will have a continuous nightmare of being in a theater strapped into the seat and watching this movie 24 hours a day until you wake up. And when you wake up, your mind will have reverted to the state of a 2-year-old. You'll require diapers and liquid food only. Because during your 6-month coma and the nightmare of watching Batman and Robin over and over, you've grinded your teeth down to the gums. You will be able to talk, but not have conversations with anyone, because for some reason, your mind is locked into a mode of speaking in out-of-context one-liners. And you also have a 50% chance of developing an Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. There's an example here taken from an actual case study of a 60-year-old woman who was affected in this way after watching the film. After some orderlies in a nursing home asked her if she was ready for bath time, she responded with the Arnold Schwarzenegger accent, "It's time to kick some ice." Thankfully, the site does offer a way to watch the movie without incurring any long-term damage. You have to enter a meditative state for 2 hours, constantly repeating, "It's going to make no sense. It's going to make no sense. It's going to make no sense." So why don't we pause the movie and the commentary here. Let's all do the exercise. 2 hours, it's going to make no sense. Just keep repeating it. Once that's done, we'll come back and we'll continue with it. Unpause and we'll pick up from right here. Okay, welcome back. You know what? I actually feel less angry and hostile towards this movie after doing that. That doesn't mean it's time to give this movie a free pass and just be nice to it. But it does mean that we should critique it with a little tough love. We can respect it for trying and actually achieving a level of campiness and over-the-top comic booky 1960s Batman tone, but we do have to recognize that it's not where Batman should have headed. Right now I'm watching the moment when Dr. Woodrue is changing the thin, wimpy Bane the criminal human character, into the bulky, strong villain character. And the only thing missing in this scene is Wile E. Coyote and everything to be labeled Acme. This is straight out of Looney Tunes. Isn't there even an episode where Bugs Bunny drinks the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde potion, and then Bugs Bunny suddenly morphs within a couple seconds into this big, huge, evil Bugs Bunny? That's the exact same tone that's taking place here. And interestingly enough, the actor playing Dr. Woodrue here is John Glover. He's been quoted as reporting that during the filming of the movie, Joel Schumacher would sit on a crane with a megaphone and yell to everybody, "Remember everyone, this is a cartoon." So again, if that was the vision Joel Schumacher had for this movie, he succeeded. He really should be recognized as someone who was able to bring their inner imaginings out into the real world. And it's easy to blame Joel Schumacher for ruining Batman, but he was under pressure from the studio to make this movie more cartoony, which would appeal to kids and families more, and of course would tie into a toy line. If there's anyone to blame for the destruction of the Batman franchise in the 90s, it's the overall atmosphere of the 90s, with the explosion of the internet boom and corporate greed and just money everywhere, and the stock market blowing up with the Dow reaching 8, 9, 10, and even 11,000 during that decade, which at the beginning of the 90s would have seemed insane. The economic orgy of the 90s made the prosperity of the 50s and the 20s look like a parent's chaperone middle school dance. For the first time in a long time, America wasn't involved in any kind of major war or didn't have a clear, impending, imposing enemy. Overall, it was a pretty carefree time. Not to say there weren't social problems within America, but overall it seemed like everyone could relax and enjoy all of the material wealth that was around them. And as is the case with human beings, when things are going well, we really don't sit down and soul search. It's only when bad things are happening and there's tragedy and pain everywhere, or sickness within us, that we go inside and look for, lack of a better term, spiritual answers. So just for example's sake, we can contrast two time periods where the upheaval and tragedy of the 60s led to the socially aware cinema of the 70s. Whether it was sexism, feminism, racism, divorce, the war in Vietnam, the assassination of political leaders, the alienation of troops returning home from Vietnam, the failed hippie culture dream of peace and love, the power of corporations to influence the lawmaking of government, and the danger, lawlessness, and despair within America's big cities. There wasn't an issue in real life that wasn't somehow reflected on the screen in cinematic life. And as mentioned in the 1998 book by Peter Biskin, Easy Riders and Raging Bulls, it's ironic how the decade that was considered Hollywood's second golden age, where filmmakers had unparalleled creative freedom, was also the era that brought about corporate control of the creative process. This happened with the emergence of the blockbuster. Jaws, Star Wars, Close Encounters of the Third Kind showed Hollywood a glimpse of what was possible in terms of how much money could be made with the right story idea and marketing strategy. By the mid-90s, this high-octane cinematic profit machine was operating on all cylinders. Batman and Robin is a perfect example of the machine employing all the rules of blockbuster success Hollywood had learned for the last 20 years. With the success of Batman Forever, it seemed very much that the public still wanted to have more Batman movies. So that was a major part of the formula for creating box office profit. Having a recognizable, still desirable movie title and character that audiences recognized and still wanted to take adventures with. The other piece of the puzzle is the star factor. The 70s, 80s, and especially the 90s saw the emergence of the actor or the star as the major player in movie creation, and ultimately movie profitability. Up until the 50s, most actors were on contract to a studio, which meant that they signed a deal to star in X amount of movies for X amount of money. This meant an actor had very little control over the kind of pictures they were making. But eventually, actors, and especially the actors that had become stars, realized that audiences were going to movies, if not totally, at least in large part, due to the people that were starring in them. They decided to break away and set their own terms. And in the late 80s and early 90s, an even more powerful actor-star emerged. The kind that earned $20 million or more per movie. The three actors mainly responsible for creating this inflation of actor-star salary are Sylvester Stallone, Jack Nicholson, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Stallone received over $15 million for the third Rambo. Jack Nicholson is famous for not taking such a hefty paycheck up front, but negotiating back end points on the box office returns of Batman, which basically means that he would get a percentage of the overall gross. Then in 91, Schwarzenegger officially became the first actor to receive $20 million just to star in a movie. Soon after that, any actor that had a track record of starring in films which became big box office successes was demanding a high payday, anywhere from between $10 to $15 to $20 million. These actors included Mel Gibson, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, and today it carries over with stars like Will Smith, Reese Witherspoon, Brad Pitt, and Angelina Jolie. These are the A-list actors, and they're paid this money because they can open a picture, which means that when that movie comes out, that first opening weekend is going to be huge, and the thinking is that the actor is mainly responsible for that huge box office. Batman and Robin continues the pattern established by Batman Returns and really perfected in Batman Forever, where you had one of the hugest stars at that time in 1995, Jim Carrey, who had come off a monster year in 1994 with The Mask and Ace Ventura. Nicole Kidman was a rising star, Tommy Lee Jones was pretty hot coming off of an Oscar victory for The Fugitive, and Val Kilmer, while not a huge box office star, had been in some pretty big movies. Almost 10 years before, he was in Top Gun, and just a few years earlier, he played Jim Morrison in The Doors. So he was known enough, and seemed to have a persona that would fit well with Bruce Wayne and the Batman character. Batman and Robin managed to assemble an impressive list of A-list actors at that time. Arnold Schwarzenegger, still one of the most popular actors working in 1997, was definitely not at the height of his popularity. That probably came in 1991 with Terminator 2, and carried over to 1993's True Lies, but after that, with movies like Jingle All the Way and Junior, his star power started to fade, but not far enough that he still wasn't getting paid the big money, because audiences still wanted to come and see his movies. Two of the hottest actresses at that time were Alicia Silverstone and Uma Thurman. Alicia rocketed onto the Hollywood radar with her starring role in 1995's monster hit Clueless. And she had also gained popularity by starring in some Aerosmith videos with Liv Tyler. Uma Thurman had come out of nowhere and catapulted onto the scene, grabbing an Oscar nomination for 1994's Pulp Fiction. The final major player here was rising star George Clooney. He had gained major popularity by starring in TV's ER, and was just starting to make the transition from TV into feature films when he got the role of Batman. And then there's Chris O'Donnell. His career really took off when he starred opposite Al Pacino in 1992's Scent of a Woman, a role that earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor. Batman Forever was pretty much the peak of his career in terms of popularity and box office drawing power. He's pretty much in this sequel because he's already been established as Robin in the previous movie. So on paper, it seemed like the studios and producers had done everything right to make sure Batman and Robin could be as much of a success as possible. You had the director returning from Batman Forever, which was a certifiable box office hit. Also, the same writer was back from Batman Forever, Akiva Goldsman, who had enough writing credentials to prove that he knew what he was doing. In 1994, he adapted the John Grisham novel The Client. Later, he would go on to do movies like A Time to Kill, another John Grisham novel, A Beautiful Mind, which was an Oscar winner, I, Robot, Cinderella Man, The Da Vinci Code, I Am Legend, and the upcoming Angels and Demons, the prequel to The Da Vinci Code. With the same writer and director back from the previous success of Batman Forever, you could be assured that that vision would stay true, and if audience had wanted it just 2 years ago, there seemed to be no reason why they wouldn't be happy with this product. And when you compare Batman and Robin with Batman Forever, they're basically the same movie. Batman and Robin is a little sillier, and it does have a lot more one-liners, but with the same writer-director back for this movie, the vision is pretty much identical to the previous film. So the reason this movie failed has to be that audiences were just tired of it. They were tired of this style of filmmaking. Burned out on the Schumacher vision of campiness, and there's no better example of that than this scene right here, where Mr. Freeze, with a robe and a cigar in hand, is in his hideout, which is freezing, and he's leading his henchmen in a sing-along that corresponds to a Christmas show that's playing on a TV. And, by the way, the TV, which looks like a normal electronic standard TV you buy in a store, in 1997 at least, not the flat screen kind that we all know and love today, but it's in a block of ice. So you kind of have to wonder, well, I don't know why the cold temperature doesn't affect it or why it hasn't shorted out already. Who knows? Just remember our mantra of sanity. It's going to make no sense. It's going to make no sense. Oh, and let's not forget that Mr. Freeze has polar bear fuzzy slippers on. Once you see Mr. Freeze wearing that little final sliver part of you that was taking this movie seriously, or at least wanted to take it seriously, was hoping that it would somehow regain a little bit of the attitude established in the Tim Burton movies, that sliver disappears. It gets dropped in a vat of acid of campiness and over-the-top cartooniness and dissolves and disappears. This officially has become an unofficial spoof of the superhero genre. As mentioned before, Scream and Austin Powers were deconstructing and spoofing genres that had become cliché-ridden and tired. And they were just the drizzle before the thunderstorm, a preview of what was to come in the 2000s. Today we're just riddled with, and now we're annoyed by, these spoof movies like Date Movie, Not Another Teen Movie, Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans. The list goes on, and they keep coming out. Because they're profitable and the format's really simple. They're basically reference movies. They take popular scenes from popular movies and rework them with a comedic angle. They totally rely on the callbacks to popular scenes from the blockbusters that we've all watched than they do on an original story and finding comedy within cliché settings and familiar characters. Good spoofs like Blazing Saddles and Top Secret that have become cliché in specific genres, they usually put some effort into creating an original story that allows them to explore the character situations and settings of genres that are on the verge of dying. What made Scream so great in 1996 was that it was a satire of the slasher horror genre. It had some spoof elements to it, but it never winked at the camera, and it was really smart and witty. Maybe a little too smart, because 4 years later, Scary Movie came out, which was basically a dumbed-down version of Scream. And just a little trivial note here, the original title of Scream was Scary Movie, and both movies were released by Miramax. So it seems like there's this natural evolution or growth of genres. In general, it seems like a genre is born, and it establishes its own rules, parameters, set pieces, and expectations. Then a ton of movies are made within the genre, and after a while it gets tired, and everyone gets bored. The filmmakers, the audience members, everyone gets exhausted by what the genre has to offer. The last breath of any life of a genre is the parody stage, the satire, the spoof, which basically holds a mirror up to that genre and says, here's everything that you are right now, and this is old and no one wants it anymore. Let's see if we can't find a way to remake you and revitalize you again. So the genre takes some notes, does some soul searching, and comes back bigger and stronger than ever. And it's an ongoing cycle that'll go on to infinity. Birth, life, and death, over and over again. In terms of superhero movies, the genre really got respected in the late 70s when Superman just blew everybody away in terms of the level of storytelling, the drama, the acting, and the special effects. It was really able to balance emotion, special effects, and action in a mature way. This was maybe the first grown-up treatment of what was thought to be a story for children. The great thing about it was that it was rooted in character. It was an origin story of how Clark Kent learned he was Superman and learned where he came from and accepted the role of being a savior for the human race. At that point, as a storyteller and filmmaker, the question has to be asked, where do we go from here? There's really just two directions. Either you continue to explore the character and allow the action to reflect on who that person is, or you just let them stay the same and go along with them on some entertaining adventures. The best example for this kind of character and franchise would be James Bond. For over 40 years, he's pretty much been the same person doing the same thing, just fighting different characters with different gadgets. That is, until recently, with Daniel Craig taking over the role, the franchise has tried to reboot itself. And that's happening because of that genre life cycle. Spoofs like Spy Hard and the Austin Powers trilogy have held up that mirror to James Bond and said, all your tricks are worn out. You need to come up with some new ones. We want to see something different because we're pretty much tired of seeing the same old, same old. So thankfully, Superman 2 decided to stick with the character, go deeper, and even darker. It upped the stakes in terms of the opposition Superman had to face, where in the first one it was Earth's most intelligent supercriminal, Lex Luthor. Here it was one of Krypton's most intelligent criminals, who also had the exact same powers as Superman, and brought two of his friends along. Combine that with a personal dilemma for Superman, whether or not he should give up his powers for the love of his life. This is probably one of the greatest moments in superhero movie history. Should Clark Kent ignore his own personal desires and his personal happiness for the sake of the greater good? If the greater good means bailing people out for not taking responsibility for their actions, and being taken for granted for the rest of your life. There are so many great character moments in that movie, especially when he gives up his powers, and then later gets his ass kicked in a truck stop diner. The same idea was incorporated into Spider-Man 2, where Peter Parker had to choose between being a savior and happiness with Mary Jane. And you might remember that at the end of Spider-Man 2, it seemed that Spider-Man 3 would be a little bit darker, and part of the reason Spider-Man 3 didn't work was that it never lived up to that promise. Again, another example of the life cycle of a genre. Spider-Man 1, lighthearted and funny. Spider-Man 2, much more dramatic and interpersonal in terms of the relationships and the inner struggles. Spider-Man 3, an abrupt return to the tone of Spider-Man 1, which is such a major disappointment because the potential to go dark is there with the suit from outer space that brings out those dark emotions. Now, the life cycle of Superman continued with Part 3 and 4, but again, you have to ask that question, where do we go from here? Well, with 3 they decided to go lighter. They brought Richard Pryor in as one of the major characters, and whenever he's around, you know things are going to get funny. So Superman 3 went a little bit lighter, and by the time Part 4 came around, it was getting ridiculous. It was on the verge of spoofing itself, just like we have here with Batman and Robin. In Superman 4, Lex Luthor created someone called Nuclear Man. Once you hear that name, you know where the story and franchise are heading. It's definitely a horrible movie, but it's a great example of how when a genre gets old and tired and starts reusing its own set pieces and ideas over and over, it crosses into this level of parody and absurdity. Just to mention a few things that Superman does, he has to save the Statue of Liberty, stop a volcano from erupting, and rebuild the Great Wall of China. You can just imagine the filmmakers coming up with ideas for Part 4, looking at this list of all the things Superman's already done in the previous 3 movies and things he could do in this one. And it's all related to just Superman wowing us with his powers. The only problem is that it's boring and stale. We've seen all the tricks under his hat. There's nothing new that he could do that would make us go, wow, Superman is great and he has all these amazing abilities. It's like we just sit there and go, okay, Man of Steel, bullets are going to bounce off. He's got the laser beam eyes. He can heat things up. He's got the tornado, hurricane breath that can blow things this way and that way. And he can fly in the air. Okay, we're impressed. Next. The Batman franchise finds itself in a similar place as those later Superman movies. The interesting thing is that Batman never went to the places where the first 2 Superman movies went in terms of character development and exploration. That's where Christopher Nolan comes in with Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. There you have a real development of character. We take the journey with Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, and we understand him and sympathize and have a connection with him. Then we watch him battle through these opponents who really challenge his beliefs, his morals, and push him to the point of even questioning if it's worth the effort to do what he's doing. That never happens in the Burton or the Schumacher films. They're very much just adventure of the week, very much like a James Bond sort of style where we know who the character is, it's Batman, he's a crime fighter, so we're just going to throw these interesting villains at him and see how he overcomes these interesting opponents. Now, Batman Returns did attempt a little bit of delving into the character of Bruce Wayne with Michelle Pfeiffer and Catwoman bringing up these issues of having a relationship with someone and revealing your other side, your dark side, your other personality. But it didn't go as far as it could have. It was very much on the surface. There were a couple scenes dealing with it, and it never really truly affected him. Sure, at the end he ripped off his mask and tried to save Catwoman by revealing who he was and trying to pull her back from insanity, which didn't work in the end. But it still didn't feel like a satisfying journey in terms of a character changing or growing. Let's take a moment to go back into the movie right now. I'm watching the scene where Poison Ivy is at the inauguration of the Bruce Wayne telescope, and there's a little press corps meeting, and she shows up with this sort of plan of protest on how to save the Earth. And it's pretty interesting because she's about 10 years ahead of the Go Green movement that's recently been popularized. The character of Poison Ivy actually goes back to 1966, so you could say that DC Comics called it 40 years before it officially became a problem and exploded into pop cultural awareness. So before Al Gore and An Inconvenient Truth, there was Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin. I really like how this scene ends for Poison Ivy because she's trying to warn the whole crowd, all the reporters and all the guests, that the Earth is in danger and we're just destroying it. And everyone just laughs at her. Like, she is crazy, but they laugh at her as if the warnings she's issuing are not based in reality. And it's just funny how 10 years later we're all saying, hey, you know what? Those ideas were actually pretty on the money. Not to say that her solutions are correct, but that her warning and her concern is justifiable. But overall, it's just a very 90s reaction that the crowd has to her. It's very, hey, the stock market's fine, we're all doing well. Enough with your crazy talk. Don't distract us with problems that aren't affecting us right now. Batman Forever also tried to have this element of Bruce Wayne as a character changing or growing, or at least revealing himself to us, the audience. There was this whole little subplot about Bruce having repressed memories about how his father died and how he found the Bat Cave and how the Bat scared him and gave him the idea to become Batman. But those ideas are so glossed over, just barely touched on the surface, that they really don't have any emotional impact on us in the audience. Nicole Kidman as Chase Meridian is a psychologist, so you would think that that character is specifically put into the script so that she can draw out these hidden little emotional treasures that Bruce Wayne has repressed or refuses to reveal to anyone. And they do have a couple sessions here and there, and there's a little bit of romantic tension, but it really goes nowhere. And speaking of going nowhere, these character development scenes for Victor Fries are well intentioned, but they're contradicted by his actions later. Here we really get some insight into why he's doing what he's doing, what's driving him, and that's fine. We actually need that from every character. The more we know each character, the more we're involved with the story overall, and the more we care about the outcome. And if this person wins or this person loses, we pick sides, we hate this person, we love this person. Here, Victor Fries is revealed as someone who does have a deeper level to him. He's not just a two-dimensional bad guy until he opens his mouth, because whenever he speaks, all he says is one-liners. And that basically erases any potential for us to connect with this character emotionally. I know that's kind of a funny thing to say for this film, but just in general for any film, if you're trying to create a connection with the audience and a character, we want to know that a character is going through some things, they've lost someone, they have some aspirations, they want to grow, or they're self-destructing, whatever the journey is. As long as there's some kind of journey, as long as there's this volcanic kind of bubbling inside of the character, we're interested to see what happens. And with these scenes of Victor's backstory, we start to get this sense of, hey, there's something going on here with him. When he's fighting with people, he doesn't reveal those inner workings. He doesn't allow that to fuel the way he fights and the way he speaks with people. Usually, just in scenes in general in a movie, characters are in a scene to fight for something. You have character A, character B. Character A wants something, character B wants something, and they both fight for that, usually using words. Sometimes in an action movie it's a gun, or in a horror movie it's a knife or whatever. But in general, when there's characters in a scene and there's a conflict for something, their main weapon of choice is the word. So words are always loaded. They're like these grenades, emotional grenades, and they're packed with all this emotional character backstory information. So when someone says something to someone else, there's always subtext, and that's kind of fueling it. So by saying one-liners are totally devoid of anything unique that's within the character. One-liners are really a form of porn. For me, I think I define porn as anything done specifically knowing that there's an audience watching. But I think there's a difference between pornography and something being pornographic. For instance, let's of course use the example of XXX, where you have people on screen doing the deeds specifically for the purpose of selling the tapes so other people can watch them. They know they're going to be watched. Now what if there was just a couple who made a tape and it somehow got out? Obviously they didn't make it for it to be watched by strangers. So it wasn't made for purposes of pornography, but the content is pornographic. So I think, for my definition, pornography is something that's made specifically knowing that a viewer is going to be watching it. Now, when you translate that into the world of fictional films, like Batman here, or whatever kind of movie you're talking about, if it's a horror movie, Nightmare on Elm Street, if it's a comedy, Something About Mary, any film works best when the characters within that film don't know and don't act in ways that reveal that there's going to be an audience watching. One of the best examples of this is just the whole genre of J-horror. J-horror is specifically done to create situations that are going to make the audience tense and scare them, but they themselves violate any kind of laws of physics or just laws of logic. Like when you watch a J-horror film, let's just use the cliche example. There's some kind of young girl with long black hair that covers her face and she's scaring people and going under the bed covers or coming out of the TV. Actually, The Ring might be the most logical J-horror of them all. I really like that one. But there's a lot of other ones, like The Grudge, for instance. You walk into the house and now you're cursed. But all the girl with the long black hair is going to do is just walk in front of the video security cameras so you can see her coming for you. And then she's going to hang from the ceiling and let her hair slowly crawl along the wall. And she's scaring you for no reason. If there's a ghost that has a grudge against you, why don't they just kill you right away? Why do they have to consistently walk behind you and when you turn around they're gone? Or when you're in the shower they reach their hand and they start caressing your head and you feel their fingers through your hair and then you turn around they're gone? Why didn't they just strangle you in that moment? There's no logical motivation to these villains. There's no reason why they're just teasing and not finishing the deed. Why don't they just complete the curse and kill the person? So that's an example of J-horror porn, where the motivation of the characters is based on the knowledge that people are watching the film, instead of just finding a reality, bringing a camera there and us along with it, and letting us observe it. You know, the best films work as if the audience is a member of a scientific community, observing some kind of event going on, but not interfering with it, and not allowing the people within that environment to know that you're there. It should just take place naturally. It should follow the laws of logic and physics, and everything should have cause and effect, and nothing should be done for the purpose of entertaining an audience. Entertainment of the audience should be the byproduct of the natural relationships of the people within that situation. And that's where one-liners come in. One-liners are really a byproduct of the 80s action films, which coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the undisputed champion of. More thoughts on that in just a second, but I want to get back to the moment of the movie here where Poison Ivy's crashed this big gala, which is really another nice metaphor for the 90s, where it's just this huge party. I mean, there's people swinging on vines and ridiculousness going on, just extravagance and money spending, and especially here with the dynamic duo having a bidding war for Poison Ivy, to the point where Batman pulls out a bat credit card. And talk about one-liner porn, Batman says, "Never leave the cave without it." Yes, that just really happened. That's actually in the movie. It didn't make the cutting room floor. It's really interesting that the filmmakers chose to cast Arnold Schwarzenegger in this movie. It's almost like they wanted to have a little bit of a commentary on the nature of one-liners in movies, because one-liners really explode with the famous "I'll be back" line in Terminator. Now, of course, there were a lot of one-liners in history before that. You have Casablanca one-liners. You have Gone with the Wind with the "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn" line. And then there's, of course, Dirty Harry, maybe the precursor to an Arnold Schwarzenegger character where Clint Eastwood says, "Go ahead, make my day." But those movies aren't filled with lines intended to become popular, or at least trying to become popular. The best one-liners aren't really intended to be one-liners. They're just expressions of the truth within that character. The most recent famous one would be from There Will Be Blood, with "I drink your milkshake." Now, there's no way that Paul Thomas Anderson sat down and wrote that and thought, you know what, this is going to become an internet sensation and everyone's going to be saying this for 6 months. The reason it caught on was because it was so unique and different, because the character that Daniel Day-Lewis played was really well thought out, very original, and when he was saying that, he was truly expressing some beliefs within him. And through his prism of reality, that's how he saw what he was doing. Same thing goes for the Schwarzenegger line in the first Terminator. When he says, "I'll be back," he's just saying it because he's a computer, and that's just him conveying information. Because of that line, it seems like every movie Schwarzenegger made after that had to have a minimum of 5 to 10 one-liners. And it really created this 15-year period of time where every single action movie at least had a couple one-liners that were intended to catch on as some kind of pop culture catchphrases. So Batman and Robin's really interesting because by casting Schwarzenegger, it almost marks the period of time that might become known as the Age of the One-Liners. And almost too neatly, it starts with Arnold and it ends with Arnold. Where in The Terminator, by accident, he just happened to become this icon for catchphrases and one-liners, and by the time it gets to Batman and Robin, it's just taken to the absurd, ridiculous level. Almost like that cycle of a genre's life, where at the beginning it's serious, and as it replicates itself further and further down the line, it approaches the end of its natural life by going into parody. And Schwarzenegger's performance here is almost too self-aware. It's like he's making fun of himself and the on-screen persona that made him the biggest star in the world for about 5 or 6 years there. So Batman and Robin signals the end of the 90s Batman franchise and the end of the intentional one-liners, as well as the end of Alicia Silverstone and Chris O'Donnell's careers. There's also another element that could be responsible for the audience's lack of excitement over Batman and Robin, and that's the early 90s explosion of independent cinema. The 70s was really a great decade for movies in terms of directors being able to just tell the stories they wanted to tell without any oversight and without any overpowering corporate greed motivation. Sure, studios wanted to make money, but at that point, they really weren't sure what people wanted to see. So they had to hope that the filmmakers had their fingers on the pulse of society, and they knew what people wanted to see. It was a time when studios were reorganizing themselves and trying to get their bearings after such a massive cultural shift. In a lot of ways, at that time, Hollywood was kind of like the Wild Wild West, and filmmakers could pretty much get away with almost anything, within reason. But then, as the blockbuster formula began to be understood by the studios, they really took control, and there wasn't as much independent freedom of vision as there was in the previous decade. Let's continue that in just a second, because we have another crazy moment coming up in Batman and Robin right here, where Batman and Robin are chasing Mr. Freeze down this huge statue's arm, and they're just about to jump off the fingertips onto a rooftop. We still have this battle between Batman and Robin that's really been established in Batman Forever, where Robin wants Batman to trust him and so they can be partners and not treat him as a kid. And so here Batman basically disables Robin's motorcycle because he doesn't think he can make the jump, and Batman follows Freeze onto the rooftop. Freeze icicles the Batmobile. Batman ejector seats himself out, and then for some reason, we don't know why, he's able to fly, kind of Superman style, right through the windshield of Freeze's car, and I guess double punches him in the face and knocks him out, because the next scene, Batman has Freeze captured. Thanks for skipping over the most interesting moment of the movie, where Batman and Freeze can potentially have a fist fight. This is the audience totally getting robbed. I think that they must have filmed maybe like a test version of a fist fight between these two, and it probably looked real stupid, because Schwarzenegger in this metallic neon costume throwing punches at Batman must look really clunky and not all that exciting. And that exciting scene is followed up with pretty much the same argument that Bruce and Dick had in Batman Forever. You don't trust me, I'm not a little kid, you gotta believe in me, we gotta be a team, wah wah wah. You're too irresponsible, you gotta keep your head in the game, blah blah blah. Same argument, different movie. It just gives you the feeling that these characters are stuck emotionally, that there's no growth, it's an arrested development. Basically, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin can be looked at as one huge film, because the characters don't really grow at all. Now, to return to that point about 90s independent cinema, with the availability of video cameras and the cheapening of film equipment, film stock, and the mobility of it, more and more people were able to get their hands on this equipment and tell their stories that didn't need to be approved by people with all the money, by producers, by studios. They were self-funded and driven only by their passion and need to share their vision. So while the 1980s might be called the golden age of the blockbuster, with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas just ruling that decade and setting the standard of how those movies are made, it was a decade that really didn't have a lot of balls to the storytelling. The hippies of the 60s and 70s became the yuppies of the 80s, and instead of preaching peace, everyone was trying to get a piece of the pie, a piece of the money. That generation may have realized that, sure, the 70s made a lot of socially relevant films, but in the end, making those films didn't change anything, didn't motivate people to do anything about it. And in the 80s, everyone just decided, you know what, let's just have a good time, get what we can get, and enjoy ourselves. So while the baby boom generation gave in, it was Generation X that didn't give up and created this new wave of independent filmmaking that started in the late 80s and early 90s. Major films that turned a movement into a revolution included Michael Moore's Roger and Me, Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, The Crying Game, Richard Linklater's Slacker. Then in 1994, it reached its peak with Pulp Fiction and Clerks. These films really resonated with audiences, conveying the sensibilities and attitudes of that time. If Bonnie and Clyde, Midnight Cowboy, and Easy Rider shook Hollywood in the 60s, these were the movies that rattled it in the 90s. So it's not too far of a stretch to think that by the time 1997 came around, audiences had been exposed to so much exciting new cinema that the idea of this throwback, campy, cliche, cartoony Batman just didn't connect with anyone. Movie consciousness was shifting, and after The Matrix announced itself like an atom bomb in 1999, there would be no turning back to this style of superhero filmmaking. We would have to wait 8 years for Batman to be reborn and once again become relevant and exciting to a changed culture. So let's shift gears here a little bit away from the deep thoughts and more towards the screenplay here and the structure, specifically focusing on how characters are developed or underdeveloped and how they fight for things within the scenes and how those scenes fit into an overall beaten sequence and how those beaten sequences create the entire movie. So here we have basically the only character development for Barbara, soon to be Batgirl, is that she's a bad schoolgirl. We're going to learn that she's actually been kicked out and is not on break from her British school, and that Alfred's niece is a bit of a criminal in the making. She actually goes out and races motorcycles in dark alleys. Actually, not dark alleys, in neon-filled, very artsy, decorated alleys. Alleys that only exist in the Schumacher vision of Batman. So that's all her character development. And Robin, for some reason, just had a fight with Batman, and it seemed like he was going to leave. He's tired of not being respected as an equal. So it seemed like he was going to go off on his own, but he's hanging around. That scene was actually kind of the beginning of a would-be maybe romance between the two. We're seeing that Robin kind of likes her. Here's another cheesy moment. We've got Mr. Freeze being brought to Arkham Asylum, maximum security. What's interesting here is actually we got Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then one of the guards is Jesse the Body Ventura, the ex-wrestler, ex-governor of Minnesota. And it's a nice coincidence, or again, maybe it's not. Maybe the filmmakers here need more credit than they've been given, because we have another reference to a Schwarzenegger film. An absolute Schwarzenegger classic, complete with tons of one-liners. It's from 1987, and it's known as The Running Man. The quick summary is that basically it's set in the dystopian future where criminals are put on a reality game show, kind of like American Gladiators, but the gladiators are there to kill the criminals, and the criminals have to stay alive as long as possible. So, of course, Arnold's character is an innocent man wrongly convicted, and of course he's the biggest challenge that any of these gladiators have ever had. They're actually called stalkers, and every time Arnold defeats one, the next one is even stronger and more deadly. One of them is called Sub-Zero, and his costume is actually very similar to the Mr. Freeze getup that Arnold's wearing here. So again, it's another tongue-in-cheek reference to Arnold's body of work. One of my favorite one-liners in that film is actually Schwarzenegger saying something to Sub-Zero when he's being chased, and he says, "A Christmas tree, light bulb, follow me." And then after he's killed him, he looks into the camera, because there's cameras everywhere and they're filming the game show. And he says, "Sub-Zero is now Plane Zero." It's you got to check this film out. It's a total classic. Love it. All right, so now we go to this next scene, which again is just a rerun of Batman Forever, where Robin took the Batmobile out and he saw the girl being attacked by this gang that's painted in colors that only respond to blacklight. Now, of course, we don't know that. I guess we're supposed to believe that this paint is just some radioactive kind of surreal color that's supposed to make us feel intimidated. Here's a wacky moment. Bane steps on the board and flips the 5 gangbangers into the air, and there's actually a slide whistle effect. If you listen really carefully, you hear the... It's basically like the Flintstones. So, again, no pretending here on what this film wants to be. This might be one of the most anticlimactic scenes in the movie. It actually seems like the leader of this gang is not really intimidated by Bane, and it looks like they might put up a fight, but all it takes is just one kick of the board, and they're out of there. Let's talk about the Bane character now that we see him in action. If you've read the comic books, he's a relatively new addition to the Batman family of villains, and he's a lot different in the comics than he is here in the movie. In the comics, he actually has a brain, he's relatively smart, and he's responsible for actually breaking Batman's back, so he's much more of a respected and serious opponent in the comics. For some reason here, they just totally made him an idiot. From the moment when he's created, all he does is grunt and groan. He's actually like a parrot. All he does is repeat what people say. And there's really no explanation why he obeys Poison Ivy. It's as if he doesn't realize his own strength and power. But then when Freeze joins their team, he has no problem obeying his orders too. So, who knows why? I guess it's not important. But it is a shame because Bane is one of the more intimidating Batman enemies. And here's Poison Ivy sprinkling her magic fairy dust, whatever it is, and plants seem to grow immediately. So, if she's worried about the environment, why doesn't she just go around the planet sprinkling this stuff anywhere there's desolation and re-greenify it, if that's even a real term, herself? But that's asking logical questions when the effect of this sprinkling of this seed dust stuff is just for the visuals. This is basically special effects porn. It exists not because it's logical within the universe of the story, but just to amaze us visually. It looks nice on screen, and that's why it's being done. And so I guess this is her hideout. I don't know if it's supposed to be intimidating. And that's probably one of the few places here that special effects, or the CGI, is really used. CGI coming into its own in the early to mid-90s, around 93, especially with Jurassic Park. And this movie deserves a little bit of credit for at least staying out of the realm of CGI, trying to keep everything as live action as possible. But then again, because it's on a stage, a lot of things look fake, especially like the icicles. They look absolutely rubbery and too perfect, so you never believe that they're real ice. Maybe if they would have used CGI, it would have looked a little more convincing. Here's a pretty useless scene. We have Bruce and his girlfriend. I'm just going to call her Elle McPherson because that's her name. And she was a pretty big deal back in the 90s, pretty hot model, supermodel. She's still around today, but nowhere near the wank-worthy popularity that she had in the 90s. And this is an attempt to have a little more character development for Bruce. It's pretty much the same thing that happens in every movie. You can go back to Vicky Vale in the first Batman, or Catwoman in Returns, and then of course Chase Meridian in Forever. They all seem to follow the same pattern where they seem to give Bruce some promise that he can have a normal life, but in the end, he always decides against it, or his secret is revealed, and they realize that things will never work out. And it's funny that there's so many people that know his secret, but yet it never gets revealed. And we never see these girls again, so you gotta wonder, maybe Bruce had him whacked out. He called up his Batman Gotham City Soprano characters and took them out, because his secret's still a secret, and we never see the girls, so who knows what's going on. And then, of course, this scene is also designed to show that Poison Ivy's horny dust, or whatever you want to call it, is still having an effect on him. He's seeing Poison Ivy while he's looking at his girlfriend, which I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. The dust doesn't really control him, it just keeps her in his mind, and that's about it. It doesn't have any further effect. Now, there was that little argument with Bruce and Dick in the Batcave after Batman had locked up Robin's motorcycle controls, and part of that argument was about trusting each other, but also it was, you just can't stand that Poison Ivy likes me better than you, which at the moment isn't leading to anything. It only seems that when she's around, then she creates problems, so what's the point of having them think about her right now? And then this is one of my favorite cheesy parts of the movie. Here we have Barbara stealing a motorcycle, or borrowing it, and going to her alley races, where, as we've just seen, a number of different gangs all hang out together. They seem to not mind the company, but it's pretty funny. It actually reminds me a lot of The Warriors, which is that 1979 film, which has a video game out that I believe came out about 3 years ago or so. There's a famous moment in The Warriors when all of the gangs of New York meet, and each of them have their own uniform, their own theme. So you have like the baseball gang, and then there's the all-female gang, and then the shaved head gang. So this scene really reminds me of that. Very Warrior influence. You actually see some kids here, I guess you call them a gang, there's like 4 or 5 of them, and they're dressed like Alex from Clockwork Orange, which was 1971. And it's just really ridiculous. And not to mention that Coolio is the leader of this back alley motorcycle racing tournament that they have. And that's something that really became popular in the 90s, where you had musicians, whether it was rock or metal or grunge, usually in hip-hop or rap, where there was a huge fan base, so they would either get starring roles or just have these little cameo appearances. Probably the most famous starring role for any musician was Ice Cube from NWA, which was really controversial in the late 80s and early 90s, having a major role in the Oscar-nominated Boys in the Hood, 1991 John Singleton film. So that really opened a lot of doors, and by 97, it really isn't anything special that we have Coolio here in a little cameo. It's nothing new in terms of the history of cinema. Musicians have always kind of crossed over, most notably Frank Sinatra having starring roles in like Manchurian Candidate and other films. Since the corporatization and the blockbuster mentality of the 80s and 90s, in the 80s you even had Dolly Parton making movies. But in the 90s it really became about how much insurance can we put in this movie? How many pieces can we put in that'll almost certainly guarantee a huge box office return. So even just putting a little cameo of a popular musician in a movie might ensure that a couple extra million come in because the fans of that musician want to see them on the big screen. This motorcycle alley race sequence really wastes a lot of time. It's almost like the filmmakers had their set idea of what was going to happen. Okay, at this point, Freeze is going to get the diamond, and Batman and Robin are going to be fighting each other over Poison Ivy, and then we have the climax later with Freeze. It was like they had this part in the middle of about 5 minutes, and they thought, well, we don't know what's going to go on here. We want the film to be a little bit longer, so why don't we just throw in the scene of Barbara character development? And there really isn't any character development. All we get to see is that she likes a little bit of danger. There's really no going inside of her mind and finding out what's bothering her, what she wants in life, all that kind of stuff. But we do get this outrageous moment here where Robin, who has secretly followed her, dives after her and grabs her ankle as she's falling off this ledge and saves himself with his own feet by bracing them against like these 2 metal poles sticking out of the cement. And how do they get out of that dangerous situation? We never know. Cut to the next scene at Wayne Manor in the garage with all the motorcycles. Thanks for, again, cutting away from an interesting moment. Earlier, when Batman dove at Freeze, we never saw the fight on how Batman won. And here, we have them about to fall off, but we just cut away. We just assume that because Dick is an ex-acrobat, he manages to do some kind of trick and throw both of them up on the ledge. This is actually really reminiscent of a classic movie, a really great movie by Alfred Hitchcock, North by Northwest from 1959. The ending there is really similar to this scene that we just watched, where Jimmy Stewart and Eva Marie Saint are on a ledge at Mount Rushmore, and it looks like Eva Marie Saint's going to fall off. And we cut to a train car in kind of one fluid motion, and we get the sense that Jimmy Stewart managed to pull her up and save her. But it's kind of a cheat. Like, you never really see how she gets out of that situation. So, not to compare Alfred Hitchcock greatness with Batman and Robin, but it has a very similar kind of vibe and a little bit of a movie cheat. Here we cut to this scene again in the motorcycle garage. And now this is really a true sort of character building moment for Barbara. So I guess the filmmakers thought there needed to be a little bit of an action sequence to show her character in motion, and then the results of that create a need for her to talk about how she's been kicked out of school and her feelings for Alfred, and she reveals to Dick that Alfred is dying. And then Dick turns around and Bruce is there, confirming Barbara's claim that indeed Alfred is sick, and Bruce is really sad. Dick can't really believe it. We'll talk about the whole Alfred dying subplot in just a second, but we have a really great scene. Anytime Mr. Freeze is on screen, it's always fun to watch. In a very guilty pleasure, I can't believe this is really happening sort of way. And that scene's going to start in just about 30 seconds or so, but just to finish up a thought in terms of Barbara's character development, we never really truly bond with her because we don't really understand what she wants and any kind of struggles that are going on. Yes, she got kicked out of school, yes, her uncle's dying, but there's nothing beyond that. In the movies where we connect with the characters, we really understand what they're striving for. Probably the best way to do this is expose a person's fears and dreams to us, and we'll understand them more. It actually sounds kind of silly to say that we want to know these characters more, but this film really has like a split personality. On the one hand, when you have these scenes with Alfred and then Dick and Bruce in the mansion, it has a borderline serious dramatic tone. It starts to kind of get back to being believable and pretty authentic. But then when Freeze comes in and these action sequences occur, it gets hyper real and you just lose anything that those character-based scenes have built. And related to character development, there's this scene here with Freeze in the jail cell, and we open up with him obsessing about his wife again. It seems like every time we see him, the filmmakers decided that his character development will be obsession about his wife. He's looking at her on the old wedding videos. He's standing in front of her as she floats in her vat of cryostasis liquid, and here he breaks an icicle off and sculpts a little figurine of her. It's actually not a bad start in terms of getting us to sympathize with the character, but it doesn't go any further than that, and any progress and growth these character scenes make is destroyed when he starts spitting out his one-liners in the middle of the action sequences. If anything, when he's fighting with Batman, he should be using this emotional rage regarding his wife in his speech. His words should be loaded with these feelings instead of just senseless one-liners. Take a look at what Freeze is wearing. He has this sort of striped sweater, white and black, and it's very reminiscent of Sandman from Spider-Man 3, also a prisoner that escapes, and also a character that sings this same sort of one-note tune of, I'm trying to save my daughter, that's the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing. Same thing here for Freeze, where I'm trying to save my wife, that's the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing. This is a nice callback shot with the criminal property lockup, and you have the Two-Face and Riddler outfits as Bane breaks in to steal Mr. Freeze's gear. Bane really reminds me of Frankenstein here. This is just like a low-angle shot, and he's walking with these arms moving to the side, this automaton. We cut back to this scene with Freeze and Ivy, and Ivy's kind of come in and stole his one-liner fire. She's just launching him left and right, and hers actually have a lot of sexual innuendo. But let's just talk about for a minute how she got in here. The guards open the door and say, "Your sister's here to see you." It's so stupid, and it's really tough to try to look at this film and make it seem logical and analyze all these little moments. It's really easy. It's just like shooting fish in the barrel, where you kind of feel like the linebacker on a high school football team senior year picking on like the ultra Stephen Hawking nerd from the math club who's a freshman. It's just too easy. It's no challenge. But on the other hand, it's a great movie to learn lessons from. A movie that made a lot of mistakes, so that way future filmmakers, future storytellers can have a chance to avoid these exact same missteps. And I gotta admit, the more and more I look at the scenes here and the colors and everything, I really can appreciate that sort of set design and costume design. It really is just this hyper-real, a graphic novel, comic book kind of come to life, but just in a purely visual kind of way. So I can appreciate it for the visual style, but that's about it, because once this dialogue kicks in, I need the diamonds from my hideout, I'm depleted, the fantasy is ruined. It's almost kind of like seeing that beautiful woman or that handsome man, depending on your taste, across the room, and your mind just kind of explodes with all these thoughts of, wow, they're perfect and all this, and then when you actually speak to them, you realize, okay, maybe not. You know, that fantasy was not grounded in reality, and it seemed better than it actually was. So that's exactly what's going on here with this movie. Love this part. Don't forget to winterize your pipes. And that's how they escape. He just pours a little bit of his freezing liquid, and the pipes explode or something, and they're able to go through that hole in the wall. Goofy moment number 582 from the film. They're going to jump out of Arkham Asylum and fall probably like 1,000 feet. This is huge. Into the water, where there's also jagged rocks. And Mr. Freeze says, I hope Mr. Bane can swim, even though Mr. Freeze is wearing all this metallic armor, and he's frozen, and who knows what's going to happen when he gets into the water. Is he actually going to swim with that? Or does he hit this button and like some kind of propeller pops out, and he's going to be like this Mr. Freeze submarine kind of thing. And why did those guards even let Poison Ivy in the first place? I know in 1997 this thing called the internet was just emerging, but there had to be some sort of police communication where they could recognize that Poison Ivy was a criminal. Uh-oh, blood pressure rising. I'm starting to get worked up. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. Okay, nosebleed stopping, calming down. Now let's talk about this moment here with Bruce and Alfred. The whole Alfred character, I really think Alfred represents the heart and soul of the 90s Batman. He was there in all 4 films. He's the only actor to survive casting changes, and his character here really represents how the franchise is dying. As the movie goes along, as it gets worse by the minute, it comes closer to dying. It comes closer to that final death where the 90s Batman is over, and there really is no certain future. And then there's this scene inside Freeze's hideout with my absolute favorite absurd moment of the movie. The part where Commissioner Gordon shows Batman the picture of Ivy and Bane at the airport, and they're trying to be all incognito. Bane has a hat on. Ivy's covering her face. She actually looks hidden, but Bane has this overcoat and a fedora on, as if it's supposed to hide him, but you see his Mexican wrestler mask still, and it's like, come on. Oh, Batman and Robin. Why? Why do you torture us like this? It's like it's testing us to see how long we can sit in the theater back in 97 or on our couches watching this on DVD. How long we can just withstand it. You know, it's just like sticking our hand in a bucket of ice just to see how long it'll take for the pain to force us to pull the hand out or throw the remote at the TV and just walk out of the room. Let's shift gears here a little bit and analyze the structure of the screenplay. An easy joke to make is, what screenplay? It looks like they just made this up. There is no writing to this. It's so horrible. But there is a structure, and let's just try to identify it. I want to talk about this area known as beat and sequencing. If a movie is released through the current Hollywood studio production system, it's going to need a star to headline it. And because of that, the screenplay is going to need to focus on a main character that can be the vehicle for that star. So the entire screenplay is from the point of view of that main character. Now that's important because when talking about beat and sequences, a beat on a big structural level is a change in the way a main character pursues their objective. Here, if Batman is the main character, the objective would be to stop the villain, stop Freeze, stop Poison Ivy. So now, the change in the way that the main character fights to do this structural beat, can either be a decision on the main character's part, so Batman can choose to take some kind of action, or it can be an event, something that's out of the control of the main character. Usually, if it's an event, it's not in the main character's control, and that means someone else is controlling it. Usually that means that the opponent is the one creating it. So if an opponent, a villain, a bad guy, I don't really like to use those terms too much because it automatically implies that it's just this guy twirling the mustache, you know, not like a three-dimensional character. An opponent just happens to be someone just as deep as three-dimensional as the main character who wants something different from the main character or wants the same thing that the main character wants, but only one of them can have it. So this opponent is pursuing their own objective. Hopefully it's in conflict with the main character so we can have some drama in the movie. And whenever they make a decision from the main character's point of view, it's an event. So for example, here we have Freeze escape from jail. That's an event from Batman's point of view. It's out of his control, and now it creates a course of action for Batman to take so that he can complete his objective, which is to rid Gotham City of these villains, these opponents. In this case, these guys really are villains. They're bad guys. Everyone here is just a cliche. There's nothing too deep about any of these bad guys, even though the movies tried to establish some sort of emotional reasoning for why they do what they do, especially Poison Ivy and Mr. Freeze. But they've totally ignored Bane, just opting to make him a mindless muscle man instead of anyone with some sort of inner workings. Even if Bane is just a prisoner who happened to be an experiment, he still has some sort of personality, even if it is kind of insane and corrupted. So here, this scene is part of this beaten sequence of Batman and Robin go try to stop Freeze after he's escaped from jail. So the structure here from Batman's point of view is that the beat, the change in the way Batman pursues the objective, is an event. It's Victor Freeze escaping from jail with the help of Poison Ivy and Bane. And now we're going to have a series of scenes that are created by, that are born from that beat, that event. And this is maybe the second or third scene. A scene just in general is a location set in continuous time. So whenever it cuts away from location and time stops there, we're going to another scene. But then again, even if there is continuous time and the camera's sort of just doing like a one-shot tracking follow-through, which is really famous in like Paul Thomas Anderson movies like Boogie Nights and Magnolia, anytime the camera goes from one location to another, even if it is in continuous time, it's technically a new scene. This also holds true if the characters stay in a location but time starts to pass. So for instance, you have a person studying for an exam, it's a college comedy or something, and they're at a desk, and they fall asleep and we have a dissolve or just a cut to the next morning. That's technically another scene within the same location because time has stopped. So just that we have a way to keep track of our beaten sequences. The beat, again, is the way that the main character changes for what they pursue, and then the sequence is made up of the series of scenes that result from this beat. So right now, we're in this beaten sequence created by the escape, and this is probably location number 3, 4, 5. Here we have the simultaneous action going on, Bane fighting with Batman, and then Robin being seduced by Poison Ivy, and now they're going to sort of argue with each other and actually fight with each other. Robin's going to get embarrassed. So this is scene number 4 or 5 within this sequence. And let's keep track of the change in locations, the change in time, and try to pinpoint when the next beat's going to occur. We're still following that thread of Batman trying to stop Freeze after he's escaped. And we're going to see what the next complication is. Right now there's a little personal battle going on between these two, and Robin finally is going to get frustrated and leave Batman. It's always good in movies in general to have your main character and their window character, their sidekick, just fighting with each other from time to time because you never want to make anything easy. And here comes the police officer saying that they've gotten away. Not really sure how that happened. Batman seemed to knock out Bane. Poison Ivy escaped, and she is now going to kill Mrs. Freeze because she wants Victor Freeze all to herself, and we don't really know why. I guess it's just that's what's supposed to happen because there needs to be some kind of conflict. Not really motivated by logic, but then again, nothing in this movie really is, and I'm getting tired of myself saying that, but you can never turn that off. You should never turn off the logic part of your brain. Even for a movie like this. We have to learn. We have to learn from our greatest mistakes. So we're back to her hideout, and now we see that Victor has redecorated a little bit. Get ready for more one-liners. Let's see what happens here. So Victor wants his wife, and she's going to tell him that Batman killed her. Which seems like it would be a nice twist. The villains kind of working against each other. This would make Victor Freeze a little more angry at Batman, but from the beginning he hasn't really been nice to him. He hasn't been fighting with him. Oh, love this. A logical moment number 9450 here. Victor Freeze, who is totally cold, somehow manages to form some liquid in his eye and squeeze out a tear, which promptly evaporates because his skin is so frozen, it's like liquid nitrogen. This is going to lead to the start of the next beat, which is going to be generated by the opponent. So from Batman's point of view, this is an event coming up here that's going to create Batman's need to respond to it and initiate the next sequence of events. Let's take a listen to this award-winning dialogue. If I must suffer, humanity will suffer with me. Gotta love that. First Gotham, then the world. So he's going to blanket the entire city in winter. This seems like it would go against Ivy's plans because she wants to repopulate the Earth with her plants, her seeds, and I'm not sure, but I don't think seeds can grow if everything is in a state of winter. She kind of reviews her plans here and breaks out this plant that's kind of like a Venus flytrap mixed with a raptor. Who knows what that's all about, but apparently after it thaws, she doesn't really say that, but she's going to basically drop these seeds everywhere. The planet will be filled with them, and they will be the last two people on Earth. She wants winter to destroy all of humanity. Now it sounds like she doesn't want any more humans to be created, so they're not going to be procreating, but then again they should be working on some kind of immortality drug because they won't be living forever. And how is she going to appreciate the new world she created? But too much thinking. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. We cut to stage 1 McGregor syndrome affecting Alfred. Little do they know that it's really the shittiness of the script, story, and characters that's killing him slowly. He is the heart of the 90s Batman franchise. And he's dying because so is the franchise. Now technically this would still be part of the last beaten sequence because Batman has not begun to pursue the objective in a new and different way. We have a hint of it. We've gotten a sneak peek at the event, which is Victor Freeze going off to freeze Gotham. That's going to be the start of it. But since from the creation point of a screenplay, everything has to flow through the main character, and based on that guideline, Batman has not changed the way that he's pursuing the objective. He's actually not really pursuing the objective all that aggressively, which is another problem of this screenplay among the many hundreds. Usually you want your main character to be as aggressive as possible in any kind of screenplay, based on the character that they are, staying true to their personality. And there has to be a fine balance between main character and opposition, where you want the main character taking an aggressive step, and then the opponent showing up to stop them, and then they take an aggressive step to try to counteract the main character. So you want this dance of events and decisions. You don't want a screenplay and a movie that's all decisions, which is just the main character constantly making these strong efforts, but never coming up against an opponent who's making events against them. And conversely, you don't want a movie where a main character is just sitting around waiting for the opponent to initiate all the action. And that's the case that we have here. Batman and Robin just sit around waiting for bad things to happen. Oh, they've escaped from jail. Oh, they're attacking the museum. We have to respond. They never take aggressive action to pursue the objectives that they have, probably because they don't have objective. They have a general rule, stop criminals, but they don't have something that they pursue in each and every scene when there's no opponents creating any trouble. And we just saw a perfect example of this where Bruce is going off to the telescope party, which means that as Batman, there's nothing that requires his attention at the moment. Even though Victor Freeze escaped, he still has to make the rounds as Bruce, and there's no impending immediate danger that needs his attention as the Caped Crusader. What's happening here is that his decision is not putting him in conflict with the opponent at this moment. It's sort of like this invisible hand of the screenwriter and the director putting him in this situation, because we know that Freeze and Ivy are going to show up here and the conflict's going to start. So that's going to be the beginning of the beaten sequence. Somewhere in the middle of this scene, the event's going to occur, the opponents show up, and now we have a new beaten sequence. To get a better understanding of the beaten sequence structure and process, just take a look at any DVDs that you might have. In general, most DVDs structure themselves according to beaten sequence in the chapter selections or in the scene selection. And that's a great way to think about this, where in terms of a movie, beats and sequence are basically like the chapters of a book. It's a little misleading to say that because every DVD seems to have the same amount of chapters. You have about 18 to 24 of them. Some of them will have like 32 or 40 even. So you can't rely on that too much. But in general, the whole idea behind the scene selection of DVDs is to break a movie up into these chapters, and just instinctively and naturally, they break up according to the beaten sequence because it's just natural to chapter something after the end of action. And usually the action comes to a conclusion at the end of a sequence. Let's see how this unfolds here. Ivy is still working her magic. Oh, here comes some of the dust on the policeman. And it seems to go over to Bruce Wayne again for some reason. Who knows what controls this stuff? And what are the laws with it? I mean, he's already been exposed to it. How long does it take to dissipate? When does it go away? And what's the intended use? Is it only a short-term thing where she can control you in that moment? Or is it an overall sort of mind control effect where no matter where you are, she can be in contact with you? And the effect on Bruce is pretty funny because he just turns around like someone just farted and walked away. I guess maybe it was a nice smelling fart. He's still looking around. He seems a little bit mad. Maybe he's thinking, no one farts at a Bruce Wayne party. I'm gonna get them. Okay, here we go. Mr. Freeze. Beginning of the new beaten sequence. Oh, we got some good dialogue coming up. Let's take a listen. I will pull Batman's heart from his icy body and feel it freeze. I love how he caps it with revenge at the end, as if we didn't know. I think Freeze's job in this movie is to say everything that he's thinking 4 or 5 times to make sure that we understand. And Bane, on the other hand, his job is to scream and yell every time he does anything. Okay, Bane, we get it. We get it, Bane. Calm down. Maybe he suffered a hernia. I mean, that thing is kind of heavy, even for Bane. Okay, here it might be. It seems like every 5 minutes we have the greatest, most horrible moment of the movie. This one might actually be it. We have Barbara trying to break into Alfred's laptop. And here Bruce is back from the party, so my mistake. I thought that Victor crashes that party, but I guess not. Which actually delays the start of the next beaten sequence. Now, technically, there's been a number of scenes since the end of that initial Freeze escapes from jail and Batman and Robin go off to fight him at his hideout. So what would you call all those scenes in between? Technically, there's still a beaten sequence, but in terms of screenplay structure, they have nothing to do with the main character pursuing the objective. But the great thing about storytelling is that a character can have more than one objective, and since here there are really 2 main characters within the main character, we have Bruce Wayne and Batman, it's possible that Bruce Wayne has his objective and Batman has his objective. So we could argue that this whole beaten sequence with the party was the Bruce Wayne pursuit of objective. Now, there wasn't any opponent there, and there wasn't any dramatic conflict that occurred during that whole sequence. So that's also a failure on the level of storytelling, because no matter what the main character does, it should never be easy. Well, here we have window character moments going on, and I've mentioned this term before in other commentaries or in videos. A window character is basically a reflection character, a character who the main character speaks to and reveals his inner thoughts, his inner dreams, hopes. Basically, the window character is our representative. The window character is the audience, and the main character sharing themselves with the audience so that we can connect with them and go along with the journey and grow along with them or fall from grace with them. So we could be watching Star Wars and Luke is growing and his window character is Obi-Wan in the first movie. Or it could be The Godfather, where we see Michael Corleone really fall into the role of his father. It's a journey of growth, but it's kind of a self-destructive journey. In that movie he talks to Diane Keaton, or the girlfriend and later his wife. So this whole beaten sequence in Batman is pretty much conflict and opponent free. And let's just lop it all together as the Bruce Wayne gala telescope thing and the Alfred window character moments where we see what Alfred means to Bruce. Not that we care much because we pretty much already know all this information, so it's nothing new. But let's get back to this hacker scene. Alicia Silverstone trying to break into some kind of primitive laptop here, putting in password after password. And I love the technology and just the graphics here on this laptop, which would be impossible at that time. What program is this, by the way, where just the Batman technology sort of floats down the screen? And this is an old movie trick here where whenever a character is on the computer and they cut to a shot of the computer screen then back to the character's face, we see all the imagery that's on the screen just projected onto them. Now, the way that they do that, obviously, is just a live projector onto the face. And this is something that goes back to 2001 and Alien. And just in case she wasn't sure that she found the secret of Batman and Robin, we have the symbol from the opening of the movie come together to just hit her over the head like a Monty Python 10-ton weight. This is a great Bane scene here where we have Freeze doing his little speech and then Bane repeating his final word. And Robin has his own signal here. He's under the control of Ivy, and she switched out the signal, and he's all confident. Now Bruce tries to convince Robin of the truth here. He's done a little bit of research, he's found out who she is. But didn't he just get scented by her at the party? If that's the term we want to use. She's got her horny dust, and she just sprinkles it everywhere. So she's scenting her opponents. How come he's not under her control? He was exposed more recently than Dick was. So how come it seems to be controlling Dick more than Bruce? And then Bruce is going to turn the tables here with the whole family speech and talk about trusting each other. And that seems to be enough to convince Dick to stop his egotistical, I can be better than you little routine, and now they join forces. So here we go, finally. The opponent is going to take some action after 10 minutes of delays and distractions. So Freeze shows up, and these sets are pretty cool in terms of what the vision was here. I can respect it, even though I don't like it. More great Victor Freeze lines. Is the party over? Over. Bane, what happened to you? And he freezes them, and who knows what the laws with this freezing a human being are. Normally I think that systems would shut down, brain would stop operating, but who knows. Again, it's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. Now Bane is setting up these icicle bombs, and apparently to activate them, you have to put them down and say the word bomb, because every time Bane does, bomb, bomb. And that's a horrible example of on-the-nose dialogue. It happened a few times before in previous scenes. Well, it happened a lot in this movie, but there was the one, my favorite moment is when Freeze shows up to his hideout after he escapes and releases his cold fog, smoke. The freezing smoke goes everywhere, and one of the cops go, "My lungs, they're freezing!" One of the most basic laws of movie making, if medicine has a Hippocratic oath, which is first do no harm, then there's a cinematic oath, which goes show, don't tell. The challenge is always to show it visually instead of speaking it verbally. If you want to have it told verbally, go see a play. That's what the theater's for. The great thing about movies is that you can show close-ups of people's faces and convey emotions and what's going on inside of them without the use of words. Another great scene here. Barbara has entered the Batcave. This is like the most unsecured place ever. In Batman Forever, Robin found it without a problem, and apparently the rave just ended because the laser lights are everywhere. Who knows why Batman would set up all these lights in the Batcave? I'm sure it's because he's partying when we're not looking. But here's maybe the dumbest part of the movie. Alfred has become Max Headroom. Look it up. Max Head, H-E-A-D, Room, R-O-O-M, 1986, 1987. And Alfred is so smart that he's programmed his brain algorithms into the computer. Why is he a butler? Why doesn't he have a suit? Why doesn't he just create some kind of robot? Because obviously he's old, he can't put a suit on and fight, but if he's so smart, why doesn't he do something more than just clean toilets? The dumbest part of that scene is not even that. It's the fact that he said, "I knew you would find this place." Well, what if she didn't? Why didn't he just tell her before he died? Because he thinks he's going to die. And if he's so smart that he can program his brain into a computer, why doesn't he find the cure for McGregor syndrome? Stage 1. Alfred, come on. Oh, this is horrible. And he made her, just like Batman Forever, where he made Dick the Robin outfit, he's made her a Batgirl outfit. Oh, Batman and Robin. It's almost over. We're almost there. These last 2 or 3 scenes are part of this new beaten sequence. It really started when Batman and Robin kind of made up and decided to go in it together again. And Robin showing up here at Ivy's hideout, is part of their plan, so they're pursuing the objective, they're fighting against the opponents. We don't know it just yet. We think that Robin's still under her control. But of course you know that they're together and he's going to find a way to overpower her. And this is a nice build-up here in terms of how the hideout was at the beginning. She planted the seeds, and now everything is just over the top. It's become a sinister version of the Garden of Eden. This might be a good time to bring up the music and the score of the film. It's really loud and over the top, and here we have kind of this seductive sort of theme for Poison Ivy. But I wouldn't even really call it a theme. I think the music's just been matched for the moment of how she looks. You know, she's sitting in this kind of flower, and she is this symbol of seduction, of eroticism. But something that really takes a step up in the Christopher Nolan movies, it moves to the next level, is in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Each character begins to have their own theme. Especially in Batman Begins, you have the two composers working on the film, James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer, and they talk about in their interviews how they, from the beginning, wanted to have Bruce Wayne have his own sort of theme music, and then Batman in costume have his own music. So the emotional states begin to be reflected through the sound, through the score. And here, another Batman and Robin, stupid moment number 422. Ivy kisses Robin, so right, she's made out of all these toxins and poisons, and if she kisses anyone, she's going to kill him. And she kisses him on the lips, and he reveals that he has some kind of latex protection that prevents him from being affected by her poison. But when you think about it, isn't it the saliva during the kissing process that brings on the death? You need the fluid exchange, so it's not just the touching of lips, you need some bodily fluids going on there. So again, it's just a ridiculous solution that makes no sense, just like the rest of the movie. But we already know that because we've been repeating our mantra, our psyche safety device. And it might be a great idea to just record that mantra on like a 1-minute loop, put it into your computer, and hit repeat on the player so that from this point to the end of the movie, you don't have to do the work to constantly repeat it, because you're going to need it. The end of the movie just accelerates into the universe of absurdity. Starting here with Batgirl jumping through the ceiling. It seems like no matter what building, whether it's a villain's hideout or some kind of party that they're going to, there's always a skylight in the place so that a villain or a hero can jump through it and make this spectacular entrance. Now here Batgirl's the one who does it, and there's absolutely no setup for her character to have any kind of acrobatic abilities. At least with Robin, he was in the circus, and we don't really know how Batman got trained. We're going to find that out in Batman Begins. But for Batgirl, she's just a schoolgirl on vacation. Well, she's gotten kicked out of her school, but she's just a teenager, or maybe an early 20-something, who happens to know how to ride motorcycles. That doesn't mean that she knows kung fu and is able to fight people and fall from 2 stories up without breaking any bones. And this battle with Ivy doesn't really make any sense. Again, in a movie, if you want to have any kind of emotional impact, and again, that sounds kind of funny to say for Batman and Robin, because it's cartoony, right? There is no emotion to it. We'll talk about the whole cartooniness in just a second. But the fight between 2 characters should usually mean something. Now, the problem is that Ivy really hasn't met Batgirl up until this moment. Now, I guess visually it looks interesting because you have the 2 females fighting, and I guess everyone likes a good cat fight. But it should probably have been Robin and Ivy because she's been manipulating him and trying to control him. Now, there was the kiss, and she did kind of fight him a little bit, but it was really Batgirl who finished her off. And the way that Ivy gets captured is super goofy, of course. I mean, what wouldn't be goofy in this film? Where the plant, and again, it makes no sense. The plant that accepted her and was allowing her to use it as a throne, now all of a sudden when she comes back to it, it gets angry and it closes on her. Now, at that moment, I was thinking maybe it was like eating her and she was dead, but at the end we'll see that she's been captured and she's gone insane and is now in the same cell as Mr. Freeze. and he's going to make life a hell, a living hell. Oh my god, it's getting even worse. Again, I hope that tape is playing in the background. You have the repeat button set on your computer. Turn up the volume, because you're really going to need... It's not going to make any sense. It's not going to make any sense. Mr. Freeze is attacking the city with his big ice ray, and everything is becoming instantly frozen. The dog peeing on the fire hydrant freezes, and everyone is stopped cold in their tracks. So now Batman and the gang are riding to the rescue. Everything, again, is iced over, even the streets. So now it's Batman on ice. We're returning to the opening sequence with the famous Batman ice skates. This is interesting. For some reason, they've decided to change their outfits. They just defeated Ivy, and somewhere in between leaving Ivy's hideout and showing up here to fight Freeze, they decided to do a costume change. Now, who knows? Who knows why you need to do that? Now, logically, if you're writing a story, you would try to set that up so the audience would understand it and it would make sense within the context of this universe. So maybe Freeze has some kind of weapon other than the ice ray that can penetrate their suits. And you have to also establish that their suits are strong and they can reflect bullets and all this kind of stuff, but they don't do that. Who cares about that? And so maybe they would need this change of outfits to kind of power up against Freeze's newest weapon. But no, again, this movie is just action movie visual porn. And this is just another way to dress up the characters in a new sort of style and make it feel like it's something different and it's been heightened and it looks interesting. But it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Help us. Help us. This movie makes no sense. Oh, I love this part. Okay, they shoot their bat grappling hooks, right? Here we go. And let's not even try to understand what propels these grappling hooks up so far, because this building is super tall. So the power required at the point of just initiating those grappling hooks would be like some kind of just super rocket thrust. But when they launch them, there's no sort of exhaust or any kind of indication that a lot of force was used. But whatever. They propel up, and of course they find something to latch onto. Then once they're up by the telescope, they use the grappling hooks again, and these are so strong that they can always break through whatever metal they need to so they can hook through on the other side. I don't know if the razor sharp or whatever, but this happens pretty much for the last 20 minutes of the movie. They're using them nonstop, and they always break through whatever metallic surface is in their way. It's just so convenient, and that's really the ultimate sin here, is the convenience, which takes us right into the whole cartoony nature of this movie. I don't want to use the word cartoon as like a bad, dirty word, because we kind of live in the age of animation and cartoon. We're really at a peak, at a height of this, where cartoons are in primetime programming, they're on the internet. Just animation is really alive right now, whether it's hand-drawn or CGI. So the thing to always remember is just because it's animated doesn't mean it isn't complex or developed or mature. The Simpsons is obviously one of the greatest just TV shows in general, and it just happens to be in animated form. When describing something as cartoony and using it with a negative sort of meaning, it really comes down to the convenience. Now, Looney Tunes is really, on the surface, seems very irrational, right? Just Bugs Bunny, whoever, they're in a situation and they can just pull out whatever kind of tool or weapon they need to take care of Elmer Fudd or Wile E. Coyote versus the Roadrunner, that kind of stuff. Now, at first glance, it makes no sense, but it does make sense because that world, that universe, the physics of that world allows it to make sense, where Roadrunner's always going to run off the ledge and make it to the other side, and Wile E. Coyote's going to chase after him, and midway through he's going to look down and realize, uh-oh, there's nothing holding me up, and he's going to fall. But it's not until he looks down that he falls. So if he never looked down, he would make it across. There's a logic to the irrationality of that universe. The problem here in something like Batman and Robin is that it takes this Looney Tunes kind of attitude where they can just shoot their guns, shoot their grappling hooks, and they're always going to make it to the ledge no matter how far up it is. And in our real world universe, these grappling hooks wouldn't be sharp enough to stick in or break through this steel. They would bounce off and fall back down. And Batman and Robin and Batgirl would need to find another way to get up there. But this film breaks those laws of physics, those laws of logic, and just takes that Looney Tune attitude of, well, you know what, let's just make it work. They shoot them up, it's going to happen. They fall, they're never going to break any bones. If Freeze and Bane and Ivy jump from Arkham Asylum and it's like 1,000-foot fall, we don't need to show that they would be adversely affected by hitting the water. You know, they wouldn't get injured in any kind of way. But in reality, they would. And this film is set more in reality than not. You know, it doesn't have that Looney Tune aspect. And I think that's a major reason why it ultimately failed with audiences, because on the one hand, it seems to be set in reality, especially when you have serious themes like getting sick and dying with Alfred and everything, and even global warming with Ivy introducing all that. But then when you leave those scenes, you enter this world of absurdity. So it really doesn't jive, and you're sending two messages, and it really gets mixed. And, you know, we in the audience don't know what to think and believe and how to feel about things. And it just sort of becomes, okay, they're just doing these Looney Tune-y kind of things, but they're not in the Looney Tune universe. So Looney Tunes cartooniness, excellent. They set it up. It's obviously a childhood classic, and it can be watched by children and adults, and it makes sense. Batman and Robin, not so much so. So never blame the medium, whether it's live action or animated. It always depends on the content, and how that content is established, and how it's presented, and how it's worked through. And here, if you thought that Freeze icing the city over was beyond belief, how about defrosting the city? Batman realigns the satellites. I kind of like that idea in terms of using the satellites to reflect the sun. Again, seems like something that is kind of sensible and would be kind of cool if done in any other kind of action movie. But the effect that this idea has with the sun beaming back onto Gotham is just so stupid. And then we have those scientists, right? They got defrosted. They were frozen by Freeze for like a couple minutes, and they got defrosted, and they're still alive, and everything's fine. So, again, that Looney Tunes illogical kind of cartooniness doesn't belong in this logical, non-cartoony world. You know, it just, these mixed messages are happening. So here we're going to see the effect of the sunlight on the city, but not before the bombs that Bane set up are paid off. And this kind of goes with the old law of screenwriting or any kind of drama, where if you introduce a gun in the first act, it has to go off at least by the third act, somewhere in there. So when you focus the camera on anything, when you set anything in motion, it has to remain in motion until it comes to a stop, until it's paid off, and we have some resolution to it. So Freeze sets off the bombs, and everything just falls apart here. We have the telescope kind of falling through the building. Now, in terms of visuals, this looks pretty cool. I mean, I'm not going to deny, again, I'm trying to not just rip this movie for the sake of ripping it, you know, by taking some kind of sadistic pleasure in destroying this, because it's very easy to do that. But Schumacher is able to create some interesting visuals here. Now, we've talked about for the last hour and 50 minutes why it ultimately doesn't work, but on the one hand, these visuals are pretty amazing to look at. They just don't make any sense. And there's the famous Batman grappling hook able to break through the steel again. So he's falling on the telescope with the two scientists, and all he has to do is just shoot his grappling hook, and it catches on, and they're able to get pulled to safety. Frustration. This movie. And as he's going up, all he does is just grab Batgirl and Robin, and they just get pulled to the top. Oh, by the way, Bane got killed, right? So they're fighting. Talk about the shortest fight ever. And Bane is really the most useless villain ever, so what do? You just pull his plug. So they just pull the little tube out of his head, and he shrinks back to normal in like 5 seconds. We could get into what that would do to the human body to go from one size that's so large to such a smaller size in literally under a minute, but we already know the answer. It makes no sense. Here, a new beaten sequence is actually started with Freeze creating another event, right? Freeze, the villain, the enemy, the opponent, made a decision to blow up the telescope, so now that has affected the main character. Again, we're looking at the movie from the main character's point of view, so an event has happened to them, and he's destroyed the telescope so they can't defrost the city. That's the beginning of a new beat, because now Batman and Robin have to change the way that they fight the villain to try to achieve the objective, which is to stop him, which is to defrost Gotham right now. And they decide that they have to just realign the satellites manually and have the satellites beam it in instead of using the satellites to beam it to the telescope and using the telescope to beam it on the city. And this is, again, another stupid moment, because how are we going to do this? It would take a computer genius to do this. Well, I just happen to be a computer genius as well as an acrobat. So we have Robin kind of using his skills, and Batgirl jumps in there. Everybody can crack codes and break computer systems and access government satellites and realign them. No problem. So the satellites just beam the sunlight on, and once light hits ice, it just destroys it. I did not know this. It just takes literally 3 seconds for sunlight to melt any kind of ice. Now, granted, I guess these satellites are taking the sunlight directly from space and focusing it in kind of like laser beam form. But the people get defrosted. Everything gets defrosted in Gotham, and it's almost like they were just on pause. So this is basically like the sunlight pressing the unpause button, and everyone just keeps walking, and they don't know, hey, was I just frozen for about 5 minutes there? Probably not. And the dog finishes taking a piss and all that kind of stuff, and Gotham resumes its life. Oh, what a horrible ending. So that beaten sequence lasts about 3 or 4 scenes. Actually, the beat that kicked off that sequence is known as a loss point or a crisis point. This happens at the end of 99% of any Hollywood released film. You know, Hollywood movies have a standard structure that's been found out and proven over the course of 100 years of cinema. That's why you have the main character, an opponent, a window character, and through the second act they're fighting each other. In the third act there's a resolution, as we're seeing here with Freeze and Batman. But before that resolution, to finish off the third act, you need to have this loss point, this crisis point, where it looks like the opponent is going to defeat the main character. The main character is not able to get what they want. You always need this in any kind of major film. So here we have Freeze set off the bombs, and it looks like the only weapon that Batman can use to defrost the city and save the people of Gotham is gone. So, not bad, but it just doesn't last as long as it should. It's such an easy solution, which is another reason why this movie is horrible, because no threat to the main characters is ever taken seriously. It's so easy for them to overcome that we just don't feel any kind of dramatic effect. Here's more screenwriting convenience. Convenience being that you never really set anything up. It doesn't have any logical kind of origin in a story. It just shows up when you need things. And that's really kind of like the lazy man's form of storytelling. Here we have Freeze open a little latch in his costume, and he pulls out the cure for McGregor syndrome stage 1. Why would he have that on him? His wife doesn't have McGregor syndrome stage 1. She's like at stage, 3, 4, 5. She's in the final stage of it. Why would he have the cure that could only help Alfred? Makes no sense, and it's convenient. But then again, it does look cool. It's like this fluorescent kind of blue. So, again, a final little statement. The film is successful in terms of its costume design and set design and its use of colors. Love the blue little cure. Very Star Trek-y. But it makes no sense for the story. Now here we have the resolutions. In a movie, all these pieces get set in motion, and by the end, we want to see where they come to rest. You know, it's like throwing the dice up in the air, and we want to see which numbers come up. Where did all these elements come to rest? So we have Freeze, he's been captured, and he still does have a little warm place in his body. That heart is still beating, and he gives the cure to Alfred, or to Batman, so he can use it for Alfred. Now we're going to see Poison Ivy. Like the Riddler before her, she's gone insane, and she's eating flower petals. And for some reason, Freeze just shows up. He's ready to kick the rave off, and he turns his lights on, his blue lights on, and now he's going to threaten her. Here's his dialogue. I've come to make your life a living hell. Why would he do this? I thought that just a second ago, his heart started beating again. He became a little more human. He's regained his previous sense of self. He just gave Batman the cure for Alfred. So why would he be kind towards one human being and now be evil towards someone else? His wife is still alive, so Poison Ivy didn't kill her. So what's the problem? Why would he do this? Because it just looks cool. It makes no sense, and the filmmakers just wanted to have a cool visual. Damn it. And we have Alfred's complete resolution here. He's up and walking about because the blue Kool-Aid has cured him. Now again, he's the guy who programmed his brain into a computer, but what's he going to do? Let's get some coffee for all these rich, spoiled brats. He's not going to go get a job at Microsoft or something. And everybody's happy. Now, Batgirl, Barbara, doesn't really have any kind of big-time story arc in this film. She got kicked out of school, rode the motorcycle around a little bit, found the Batcave, and became Batgirl. It really has no effect on her character. At least in the previous film for Robin, Two-Face killed his parents and his family, and he was really bent on revenge. At least that film tried to have some kind of bigger themes, and for lack of a better word, a message. Robin actually had to go through some growth. He was kind of a younger kid back then, and he was just obsessed with killing someone. And Batman was telling him, hey, have you ever actually killed anyone? Do you know what that means? Do you know what that means to live your life in a constant rage, seeking people to take out your frustrations on? So that movie at least tried to be a little bit deeper. And that's probably because it was coming off of Batman Returns and the first Batman. So it hadn't moved to this level of just parody yet, which again is kind of the natural progress of any kind of story, any kind of franchise. When you start a film at one place, in terms of Batman here, starting a little more serious with the Tim Burton vision, and then moving through into the Joel Schumacher territory, where Forever is right in this middle ground, where it has a little bit of the seriousness of the Burton movies, but it's moving towards the camp and the parody of the 60s TV show. So Forever is kind of this nice middle ground where they're trying to have the characters still remain pretty human and have a little bit of complexity and depth to them. The Robin story is especially good. And Bruce Wayne, of course, revealing his past. He's got this repression. He's working with Chase Meridian. At least there was a visually obvious effort to try to make it psychological, to have this balance of action, some heightened visuals, and some deep emotions. But by the time we get to Batman and Robin, 2 years later, the series is at its natural end. It's just this life of any kind of genre, in this case the superhero movie, where just as in the Superman films, by part 4, it's already parodying itself. And this is the same thing for Batman and Robin, where any kind of inner journey for characters really isn't taking place. So no one really learns anything or changes. Not for Barbara, not for Robin, not for Batman. There's really nothing going on except just the process of moving the figurines around, kind of like the puppet masters from above, the screenwriters and the director, just saying, okay, by the end of this movie we need to have Batgirl introduced, and they all need to come together. They're a team. I guess the only theme might have been Batman and Robin working together, but that's a carryover from Batman Forever. And now we have all three of them running towards the camera with the bat signal in the beginning. Again, a nice complete vision that also began in Batman Forever, where Batman and Robin were running together at the end of the film. So Schumacher does have a vision for the movie, and he is able to bring it through and convey it, and it's uniquely his. But unfortunately, it's the wrong direction. But on the other hand, he really couldn't help it, because the series was naturally coming to the end of its life. Same thing that happened for James Bond. James Bond, which was born in the 60s, really came out of the whole Cold War mentality, where you had East versus West, and the whole emerging spy genre. So you had James Bond being the super spy, and combine that with the emergent sexuality that's taking place in America at the end of the 50s and in the 60s, where you have the Kinsey reports coming out, the sexual behavior in the human male in 1948, sexual behavior in the human female in 1953. And then you have Hugh Hefner create Playboy Enterprises in 1953, the same year as the Alfred Kinsey female report. So there's this whole emerging consciousness about kind of sexuality being repressed in America, and now it's time to open that genie out of the bottle. So that's combined with the notion of a spy, and you have James Bond. That lasts for about 30 years, basically to the end of the Cold War, where we don't need spies anymore, or where spies aren't so romantically portrayed in films. What happens at the end of the Cold War is that there isn't a clear enemy anymore. There isn't that Russian menace. Now it's just a bunch of little enemies, and we don't really know who's against us. That's why the 90s are kind of this time to be like, hey, let's not worry about anyone fighting against us because we've just defeated Goliath. Russia, communism, it's over. Forget about it. Lenin is dead, baby. Stalin's gone. So let's focus inwards. Let's kind of have a good time. Get the glow sticks. Let's hit the ecstasy and cue the lights where it's time to dance a little bit. James Bond loses his relevancy. And in the 90s, you have some James Bond films with Pierce Brosnan, but they really don't feel the same. That's why now you need this reboot, because that old mentality that kept James Bond alive for 30 years is gone. So how does James Bond apply to our world today? And he kind of does, but he's fundamentally been changed. Daniel Craig's James Bond isn't the playboy anymore. That aspect's gone. He's more of like a ruthless kind of just fighter. The lines of loyalty and good and evil are really blurred, and that's pretty cool, but he could easily be John McClane from Die Hard. He's not necessarily James Bond anymore. He's just a guy in an action movie who happens to be called James Bond, because the truth of his character is really gone. He was created in the 60s with a certain mentality and represented something culturally, and that has definitely run its course. And that's what happened with Batman here. Again, we have that evolution of genres. And really quickly, one last example, horror movies, where you have, take it, Freddy, Jason, Hellraiser, even Leprechaun, right? They all seem to end up in outer space. I think Freddy's the only one who hasn't made the trip into outer space yet. And he seems like the one that would be most likely to, because he's in the dream world. And he could easily manipulate dreams to be set in space. But he hasn't yet. However, he has entered the level of absurdity. As with all those horror movie characters, the first movie's really interesting, and it's unique, and it sets kind of a new precedent for filmmaking in terms of that genre, but then it becomes copied so many times that the character loses their initial appeal. And within their own movies, like within the Friday the 13th series, where you have Jason into space by the 10th part, it becomes, well, what else can we have this guy do? Yeah, part 1, it was his mom. Part 2, he shows up. Part 3, he gets his mask. Part 4, it looks like he's dead. Then part 5, we totally leave him and throw you for a curveball that we're following one of his victims, and it's more of a psychological study, but it doesn't fit. And then part 6, he comes back, and then part 7, we have telekinesis. Then he goes to Manhattan in part 8. And then in part 9, we're going to send him to hell with the promise of a Freddy vs. Jason. And then part 10, he's in outer space. And then we have the actual Freddy vs. Jason. So you got to keep upping the ante. You got to take it to places that become less and less, I'd say, realistic within that universe. So basically, him killing teenagers gets old, and the genre dies. And that's what happened here with Batman. It finally decided to parody itself, and it probably didn't do that consciously. I really doubt the filmmakers consciously decided to put this all in. If they did, they're a lot smarter than all of us, and it's a secret little in-joke between them. But more likely than not, they just picked up on the times. It was, again, the 90s, the Cold War is over, stock market is up, and films are just plain old fun. It's independent cinema that's addressing kind of the serious issues, and in terms of capitalism, you get a lot of these messages of, is the materialistic view of life the way to go? It's nothing too new. It's been done in the 50s and in the 60s, but a little more of an explosion of it in the 90s, and you get these sarcastic kind of films on existentialism, which kind of maybe picks up from the European films of the 50s and the 60s, especially European films, because they actually had all the damage from World War II. America was at a distance in World War II, so it truly never affected us. It did affect us in terms of the baby boom and returning soldiers, but when we left our houses in the morning to go to work, our roads weren't demolished, our buildings weren't gone. We didn't have to walk through rubble. In Italy, in Germany, England, you had to live through that for decades. Even in the 80s, there were parts of England which had been bombed that still weren't rebuilt. So what does that do to a people psychologically? Well, we found out in 2001 it happened on our home soil, 9/11, the World Trade Center, and as a result, I really think that films, the collective consciousness first of the country obviously changed, but then film started to be informed with this, and that's where we have Batman Begins coming in, where we're looking for a little more seriousness to our superhero, this dark side, because life isn't rosy anymore. You have kind of the stock market bubble bursting at the end of the 90s, at late 99, especially in 2000, 2001, and then with 9/11 the stock market even plunges more. So this rosy outlook, this clear line of good versus evil, which was really kind of ingrained World War II and then through the Cold War, where it's always us versus them, it's not so clear anymore. Now obviously it's terrorists, that's a very clear thing, but now it's, well, how do we fight them? We don't know who they are. They could be anyone. They could be everywhere. As has been found out, is that the terrorists were actually in America for a while. They were getting trained here on how to fly planes. So they were in our country before they attacked it. This isn't like Pearl Harbor, where the planes come from one place and they go to another, and it's very clear, okay, well, they came from there and they attacked us over here. No, they were here already. So it's just this really dangerous feeling in these times. And a part of that is addressed in Batman Begins, but then really the Dark Knight just totally takes on the whole notion of terrorism and safety and society and what holds a society together and how easily it can fall apart. So we'll talk about that when we get to the Dark Knight. And just some quick final thoughts here. The music playing during the credits, I know the movie's over now, we're running a couple minutes late, but just to get some final thoughts out, the music playing during the credits of Batman and Robin here is a song by the Smashing Pumpkins, and interestingly enough, coincidentally, they actually have the song that plays during the Watchmen trailer. Watchmen's coming out in about 3.5 months. And it's really interesting because Smashing Pumpkins have a song on what is considered to be the worst superhero movie of all time. And now they have a song on a movie that's based on what's considered to be the greatest achievement of comic book art, the graphic novel Watchmen. And Watchmen really sets a new standard in terms of storytelling with superheroes in the comic book medium. So hopefully as a film, it'll set a new standard for filmmaking in terms of superhero movies. And we've had about 10 years of superhero films. So just like we had 60 or 70 years of comic book art before Watchmen was created, here we have 10 years of all the major comic book characters before Watchmen comes out. And hopefully revitalizes, because just like the natural flow of any genre, any film franchises we've discussed with horror movies or James Bond, Superman, and Batman, the same thing can be said for superhero films as a genre in general. Are they staying fresh? With The Dark Knight, you can absolutely say that superhero genre is not tired yet. It's still reinventing itself. It's still very fresh. And finally, in terms of the movie here, in terms of the box office, let's just take a look. Batman and Robin in 1997 grossed about $237 million worldwide. Its budget was $125 million, and it made about $43 million its opening weekend. It probably would have made more, but I'm sure word of mouth just killed it. It would have been fine if it had been good. Very much like Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 had a record opening. It was the largest 3-day opening for any movie ever. And it probably would have gone on to really give Titanic a challenge for its record holding for $600 million made in America and $1.8 billion worldwide, just like The Dark Knight is doing. If it had lived up to expectations, it would have really broke some records. But because it turned out to be a pretty bad movie, it totally tanked in the following weeks after the opening. Now, Batman Forever in 1995, its budget was $100 million. And it grossed $335 million. So the budget's cheaper, even though technically it has bigger stars, and it makes more than Batman and Robin. So we can start to see why there wasn't a sequel immediately following Batman and Robin. Now, Batman Returns, we're going 1992. The budget's $80 million. It makes $283 million worldwide. So you'd figure that's not too bad. The budget's not too high, and it makes a decent amount. But I guess they felt it was getting too dark, and they wanted to go lighter as the times in society were becoming, and they felt it should have made more, so Burton is pushed aside. technically he's not pushed. I guess he approves of Joel Schumacher as the director, as the story goes. Batman, probably the greatest numbers. In 1989, it only cost $35 million, and it made $413 million worldwide. Now that's profit. That's pretty amazing. And finally, let's just mention Joel Schumacher, the man who everyone hates in terms of Batman and Robin. A little bit undeservedly so. Hopefully, during our time together here, we've come to understand that definitely the studio and the people that have the money really influence how the final film comes out, in most cases. And especially in this case with Batman being a franchise, there's really no way they're going to give someone total control. So hopefully we've seen that Joel Schumacher is a very capable director, and he's able to bring his vision to life. Again, the vision for Batman and Robin was almost maybe creating itself because it was the end of its natural cycle as a film franchise. It's only capable of going so far. And at least he was able to tap into that 60s vibe, and he really brought it to life. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work. So, nice try, Joel. You definitely have the skills to be a director, but for Batman and Robin, we really didn't want it. And just to mention his next project, Joel Schumacher, so Batman and Robin is 97, and in 99, the very next project that Joel Schumacher undertakes is 8mm, starring Nicolas Cage, which is all about Nicolas Cage as a detective, a private eye for hire, trying to find out the truth behind a snuff film. His character is basically shown an 8mm film of a girl getting murdered, and the person who shows him the film hires him to find out if it's actually real or if it's a fake, if this girl's alive or dead. And it goes to some really dark places, so you could really see that Joel just kind of went out and he said, you know what, I want to prove to everyone that I'm capable of creating a story that's a little more complex in terms of characterization and tone. And it really goes to some nasty places, so I'm sure that was very much in his mind after Batman and Robin and kind of hearing all the criticism regarding it, saying, you know what, I am capable of going to these places. It is within me as an artist to explore. Who knows, maybe it was kind of his way of saying, hey, give me another shot to redeem myself for Batman. I'll go out and make this dark movie, and maybe you'll give me a chance to make Batman Triumphant, which was the planned sequel to Batman and Robin, but it didn't come to fruition, and we had to wait 8 long years for Batman to reemerge on the big screen. And in the end, it was really worth it because we got Batman Begins. But let's talk about that next time on Movie Night. Thanks for spending the time listening. Please leave your comments and feedback. It's the only way that we get better and learn from our mistakes and learn from our successes. So again, thanks a lot. And in the meantime, choose your movies wisely, and as always,
long live good movies.